welcome to Tanked Up, the podcast all about craft beer and video games. There's no Ben. I'm your host, Aadil, and I'm joined as ever by Lucy.
When was the last time Ben wasn't here? It's been a while.
Yeah, it might have happened once in the summer. Other than that, it must have been in the before times.
When was the last train wreck?
Oh, that's a good question. All of the time, and then Ben stops us. But also, we've got two special guests here today with us. From Bitrot Games, we've got Curtis.
Hello.
And Chad.
Hello.
And they're here, of course, to talk craft beer and video games. So let's first crack into some drinks. So, Chad, you've got a big smile on your face. What do you got? What do you got for us today?
All right, so I got a beer. It's called Damnation.
Ooh.
From Russian River. I don't know if you've ever heard of Russian River Brewing.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. So this is it's interesting. I haven't had this beer, I think, in like 10 years. It's been quite a long time. They're up in Santa Rosa in the Bay Area, and Curtis and I used to live up in Oakland.
Oh, okay.
So we used to go out to Russian River, and that's like the last time I've had it. But just recently we got a bunch of Russian River beers, and this is one of them, and it's a strong Belgian pale ale. So it's going to be something kind of like a Duval or something like this.
Nice.
It's been a while since I've had it. If I remember correctly, it's going to be a bit on the lighter end for a strong Belgian pale ale. I mean, as light as like a 7.5% beer can be. But yeah, let's. I guess I'll just crack it open now.
Yep,
yeah,
for sure. While you crack it open, Curtis, I know you're a bit under the weather. Do you have a beverage that you're drinking today?
I do have a beverage. I have a nice tea. It has honey and lemon. And the only thing I know about the tea is that it's some kind of Chinese black tea. But the exact name of it, I don't know, unfortunately.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I mean, tea is, I mean, you're speaking to two people who live in the UK, so tea works just fine.
Yeah. We actually used to live there, Chad and I.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Yep.
Whereabouts?
For 3 years.
Yeah,
I lived in Brighton.
Chad was in Brighton.
Sorry.
And I was in London. I was in Dalston. For
okay.
2 years.
And what were you guys doing there?
Well, we were doing school, so we were both doing PhD programs. But
Oh,
Chad
in
was
what?
We were at two different places. Somehow both ended up in England, though.
Did you know each other before? Or
we're brothers.
Oh,
brothers.
Right, of course. Yeah. Sorry, I'm having a good old brain flower.
We haven't even opened the beer yet.
Yeah.
We have history.
Yeah.
They were separated at birth, and
then
this is
found
their
each
first
other
time
in the
meeting
UK.
now, actually.
So what were the PhDs in?
Yeah,
Mine was in music informatics.
Oh, cool.
Curtis is, I forget your exact title, what it was.
I just say, computer music stuff.
Computer music, is maybe the simplest way to put it. So kind of the merging of music with technology and computational creativity and this kind of stuff, generative music, procedural music, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Lucy, what do you got?
I think it's the only beer that I have in the house. I am
one of those days.
drinking. Yeah, I am drinking a Pomona Island, and this is a collaboration with Northern Monk, and it's called Cancion Mixteca. It's a Imperial Churro Stout. I'll read a bit of flavor text that's on the back. This is an Imperial Churro Stout, sweet burnt sugar notes with lots of chocolatey cacao nibs and a touch of cinnamon. O land of sunshine, I sigh for to see you. What's the strength? Where is it? 11%. So this may last some time. So, yeah.
Nice.
Very nice.
Nice. Well, while you crack into that, I have a special week this week because it was my birthday a couple weeks ago, and I got given beers, and I've been holding on to them because I don't know if you've heard of Hiver, Lucy, but I hadn't.
No, it's a new
Hiver
one.
is Hiver beers are a bee. So Hiver is a honey based beer thing, but their whole shtick is that they support bees. So they even have a bee and beer experience, which literally, so the flavor text doesn't talk about this blonde beer. It does say, come and visit the Hiver Bee and Beer experience and get hands-on with beekeeping. You'll learn about our work supporting British bees and how we make this award-winning, fresh and natural blonde beer brewed with a touch of honey. It's the crisp, refreshing taste of Hiver and our sustainable approach to brewing great beer that makes it feel like summer all year long. Yeah, I'd never heard of these guys.
No, that sounds really cool. So, sorry, what style was that? It's not. I just kept thinking mead.
No, it's a blonde, but with some honey in the mix as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
right. Interesting.
That makes sense. I actually have homebrewed for a long time, and whenever you add a lot of like pure sugar to beer, it actually dries it out. It makes the yeast like eat more into the beer. So it makes sense that it's like a lighter style.
Yeah. So it's 4.5%, and it was given to me by my partner's mom. Cheers, Bernie.
Nice.
It was just like a beer. This is one of the few
Better
things.
than socks for presents.
Yeah, I mean, I've only had like 2 1-hour conversations with her, so.
And she knows that to buy you beer, so.
It turns out I'm easy to buy for when people are just like, yeah, Aadil, the beer guy. And I'm like, is it a problem that my partner's family and friends just know that I drink? That's like the only thing. Cool. But yeah, she also handmade me beer bunting, which I forgot to put up before this episode. Which is just, a nice touch of, oh wow, you went overboard and I feel really weird about this. I mean, not really, but it's just like, oh, that was way too sweet. Let's hope this isn't.
Bless.
Yeah,
we're gonna have to look into that brewery.
Yeah, so while I pour, let's circle back and tell us how the Damnation is.
Yeah. So I mean, first I'll just talk about the aroma, which is already like it's been so long, I don't remember it being this intensely malty just off the smell alone, but that also a lot of like clove and I would say like breadiness, a bit of fruit, like maybe like a banana, spices. Yeah, it smells amazing actually.
Nice.
It's like coppery in color.
Yeah, it's got a nice kind of, I would say, like, it's not super pale, but it's not super dark either. So kind of nice golden copper. And yeah, the flavor is, man, I like this a lot more than I remember. I remember the first time I had it, I thought it was too much banana flavor. I'm not big on banana, but having it again now, yeah, the malt is a lot stronger than I remember. And it's got like, it's this intense malty bready sweetness that complements the kind of, like, I would say, the kind of the clove and the spice and the kind of banana. And the banana, I would say it's not. There's also some apricot in there too. So I'd say it's definitely like a mix.
Nice. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys are making me jealous.
Now it's 7.5%. You said
7.5%.
Does it taste very boozy, or is it like masked by the
no? Although to be fair, this has been aged for like a year, so it's been sitting there in cask condition for a little while, so it's not super hot.
Nice. Anything remarkable to tell us about the tea there, Curtis?
It's just exactly what I need right now.
I mean, perfect. That's what we want from all our beverages. Yeah. Oh, look at that, Lucy. That looks nice and dark.
Yeah, when I started pouring it, it looked a bit like an oil slick, but to be fair, heads, you poured it probably about 1 finger, like kind of like foamy head, but it stuck around as well. So it's a good looking bit. Smell wise, I think I'm getting probably a bit more fruit on the aroma rather than the chocolate. Like sort of like maybe cherries on the aroma.
Mm.
Yeah, but I mean, you can't. It doesn't smell strong. Even though 11%, we'll see.
I mean, that's always a nice thing when it's not. It doesn't smell boozy.
That carries through to the taste a lot. You know, there's a lot of that like kind of like cherry on the taste. It's actually kind of weird. Where it's like, oh, I just expect like thick dark malts, chocolate, and everything like that, and you are getting that. But I think like on the front of the taste, and even carrying through to the finish, you are getting like sweet cherry. It's sort of like a Black Forest Gâteau.
Oh,
That's
okay.
what it tastes like.
So not sweet cherry like maraschino cherries, not like a punch or like a hit of sweetness.
Kinda, you know,
Huh?
like I am getting that. I am getting a lot of I don't know if my taste buds are off or I'm conflating things, but I'm definitely getting like a lot of fruit on it, which which gives it like this kind of like uh not all the way tartness, but kind of like refreshingness, like, and just it doesn't feel heavy. I mean, as I've been talking, I can feel like the alcohol burn and like it warming after a while. So you can definitely tell it's an 11% beer after a couple of seconds. But I think it stops it being like kind of oily and like slick. Just that kind of fruit in the flavor, just giving a bit of refreshment. But it's it's a strong one. It's definitely growing. The more I talk, so yeah, it's gonna be sipping on this quite slowly. But yeah, it's nice. It's nice, as I say, like Black Forest Gâteau, like kind of thing. But yeah, it's a good beer. Very nice. I
One
don't know
thing I
about
wish
the.
that sorry.
No, carry on.
I was just going to say one thing that I have seen some breweries do that I wish more would do. This is a bit geeky, but sometimes they'll actually print the original gravity and the finishing gravity on the beer. And that's super
Yeah,
interesting because you can
hardly see
find
that.
kind of like for a beer like that, that's like 11.5%.
You want to know the
That tells
sugar?
you it's acidic,
Yeah.
but it might actually have like a lighter mouthfeel to it if the
Yeah.
finishing gravity is lower, which adding fruit to the beer will make it tend to finish like that a bit lighter. Whereas if
Yeah.
you could
Yeah.
make the beer such that it's 11.5, but also still has this bigger punch, so it'd be interesting to see kind of where that falls.
Yeah. You never see that on cans. Like at most, you maybe get like the IBU or something like that, and maybe the hops and the malt bill. But like, yeah, never, hardly ever see gravity. I think like maybe Tuol, if I'm thinking correctly, like used to do gravity on their
Yeah.
cans, but yeah, seldom see that.
To be honest, like we see it a lot more in the UK, but I think when everyone moved to cans, they all kind of embraced the full art sort of approach because they
Yeah.
can.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's also why we don't have a lot of flavor text anymore. When it used to be, you used to get a lot of stats for us beer nerds, and then some flavor text and a bit about the brewery and a picture, right? And now we get like alcohol by volume and don't drive while pregnant. I mean, drink while pregnant or drive.
Yeah, I mean this doesn't even have like the malts or anything on it, but yeah, in terms of like it being like a churro, not getting much of that cinnamon. Maybe as it warms up a bit, because I'm drinking it slightly a bit cold, so might see if anything else enters the flavor later. But yeah, not really getting the cinnamon too much at the moment. So, but yeah, it's sweet, but it's not overwhelmingly so, because I mean, as you know, Aadil, I'm not a massive fan on sweet beers. I prefer when there's a bit of bitterness, especially in like a stout, to just counteract that sweetness in the alcohol a bit. But it's nice. It's good.
Excellent. I'm jealous of both your beers because I've got the opposite type of beer. This nice clear. Look how clear this is. You could practically see my eye through if it wasn't for all the glare through it. It's really clear, nice straw gold color, poured with basically this much head, so it's quite carbonated. It's been regrowing that head. I mean, it smells like a blonde, but a little, I would say it's more floral. I can't quite, it's not quite as strong as something like a jasmine, but there's definitely a flowery note to the nose, which is, rounds out a little more. Ooh. Oh, that floral carries right through. I'm trying to figure out what that scent is. It's going to drive me nuts, but
honey.
Yes. Thanks, Lucy. That was exactly it. Okay, I'm done. It's honey. No, it's really crisp. And what I really like about it, jumping off of what Lucy said, is you can taste that honey, but the honey is more, like I said, lending a little more depth to it, giving a bit more floral notes. But it still has a bitterness. It finishes kind of dry in the mouth, or rather, the bitterness makes you feel like it's dry because actually my tongue is quite wet. It's not actually pulling moisture out of my mouth, but it's just got this peak of this little bit of bitterness that like isn't in your face, but it's just pulling everything back and making me want to take another sip, which is the right amount. Regular listeners will know that one of my pet peeves is when a beer forces me to drink it again. This is more inviting me to have more.
Yeah, not too dry.
Yeah, exactly. So that honey is sitting on top of it, and it's like this, like an umbrella of sweetness. So it's not really in the main flavor. It's kind of sitting on top, and it's not changing throughout. So it's just this like light honey sweetness, kind of like if you and someone else are in the kitchen at breakfast time, and they crack the honey on the other side, like beside you, and you get a whiff. It's like that's like the honey isn't super strong. It's just giving you that, oh yes, there's now honey in my day kind of feel.
That's good. Yeah. Because rarely see beers incorporate honey that well. And like not a lot of brewers do it. As well, especially on this side, other side of the pond. Like mead is, almost non-existent these days. So.
Yeah, and this is like exactly the opposite of mead, where those are honey forward for obvious reasons. This is like, again, my first sips could tell I noticed the floral before that umbrella of honeyness because it's just a really light touch to the brew, which is quite excellent. I was a little worried for the same reason as you, Lucy. I don't really like super sweet beers, and this has a sweetness, but again, it finishes like it's crisp and it finishes with a bit of bitterness, which is great. I'm being yelled at by a feline, so I'm going to let it out of the room. And then we'll continue. I'll write that down as a note. And then we can start chatting about your game, guys.
Cool.
Any notable honey beers over in the States, or?
Midas Touch is the biggest one that I know of, by Dogfish Head. I don't know if you've had that one.
I've not had them, but I've definitely heard of Dogfish. Yeah,
that's really good. I actually forgot about that until you said that. It's probably been 15 years since I've had that beer, but it is quite good.
I mean,
which one?
Supposedly, right? They got it from like some ancient Sumerian recipe, right? I don't know how believable that is, but that's what they say.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where a lot of it originates from. So any brewer could just say, "Yeah, Sumerian, got it." Yeah, but Ninkasi or stuff. Yeah, just like we know the deal. We know the recipes from 10,000 years. Talking about honey beers, and if there were any notable ones.
Oh yeah, there was one.
No, carry on. I think I was gonna say, didn't we have a honey beer at one point that you brought over or something? Or
yeah,
something else?
Possibly.
Maybe misremembering.
I'm trying to.
They don't do this recipe anymore. I don't know if you two have heard of Daya up in Cheltenham. They
think
used
so.
to do I think it was a honey IPA, and it's probably the best honey based beer or beer with just honey in period that I've ever tasted, and they don't do that recipe anymore, and it kills me all the time.
Was it sweet? Was it like sweet and bitter, just like cow, or is it?
Yeah, because it was it had all the tenets of like a IPA. Just they had that bitterness, but they particularly do like very fruit forward beers nowadays, and back then it was a bit more balanced with the bitterness. But yeah, it just really struck that really good balance between like being a juice bomb, which is always like almost like the honey that had like this milkshake. I think it was a milkshake IPA, which is definitely not my favorite style of beer and not one I'm a fan of usually. But it just strokes such a good balance in between. Like a very juice forward but still bitter and just good beer. It's a really good beer and I miss it every day. I still got like the can. I'm just like gonna go up to the brewer one day and say, just make this just once, just for me.
My favorite fruit-based or fruit incorporated beers are actually also from Russian River. I would say if you're not familiar with them, they're most known for their sour ales. And so they all incorporate different fruits in them. And my favorite from them is this beer called Consecration, which has black currants in it, and it's aged in wine barrels. And it is
Nice.
amazing. It's hard to even completely describe it, but still to this day, it's one of my absolute favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never had a Russian River beer, I don't think, and I just want one. I want
Yeah,
to
me
try
too.
one, but yeah, I mean the scene over there in America just seems crazy though, like having to queue up for like hours or days to get
Yeah,
like
it's kind
2
of
cans.
I will admit that when I moved to the UK, I really enjoyed all the different beers I had not had access to before. But there was definitely a part of me that absolutely missed the craft
Yeah.
beer scene in the US, especially at the time. I bet now there's like a lot more diversity over there. But this was like 10 years ago. So
Oh,
but I
yeah.
remember quite liking Dark Star and I believe it's Thornbridge, if I remember it correctly.
Yeah. There's something about the thrill of the chase of getting like a beer that's not on general sale and hard to find and stuff like that. So that was Daya for me. So it was, but like they're much bigger now and they've got their canning line and everything. So, but yeah, I'm glad they're around more. But yeah, the thrill of the chase is gone.
I mean, this is sort of the double-edged sword because the thrill of chase also necessitates what you were saying like 5 minutes ago, which is they don't make this anymore, and I just want them to make it because there's only so many runs they could do. I mean, it's such as craft beer, although at least in the UK, because it's interesting because in Calgary, in Canada, in Calgary, where I'm from, we had the microbrewery scene before craft brewery, and now the two have met. But for a long time, the microbrewers would be more like they'd have high quality beers, but they'd have high quality lineups, and they would have seasonals that you would like. But then even once they got established, it'd be like, that brewery's gonna have that seasonal at Christmas. It's not a question. They're just gonna make this Christmas beer, and they were very like status quo style brewery, just small and very good, but obviously. Craft brewing has changed. That's I think marks the difference between the two, which is like craft is trying to make the thing and constantly iterate and do new things and try new things and get better and do nonsense and Calgary currently, it's funny because I moved away 10 years ago in 2010, and there we had a couple of microbrews that like were very successful and a couple smaller ones that started, and then in the past 5 years now there are over 30 breweries in Calgary, and they're all small craft brewers, and like half of them have tap rooms and they're just kind of doing their thing, and like the idea
Why are
of
you still Oh yeah, you live in Bristol, which is the Calgary equivalent of the UK. Yeah, I get it now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm spoiled wherever I go. But yeah, and it's really interesting to see now, like my friends not who just like drank like Wild Rose Brewery, who we've had as a guest before. Like that's like they know what they like from Wild Rose to change to like they don't even have like a standard beer in their fridge anymore. They've just they've joined the craft beer culture, so there's always a churn. So it's like, oh, do you want a beer? Hold on, do you want like? And then there's 5 choices, and there's only 7 beers in the fridge, right? Like, and it's like when I left, you guys came with me somehow. But it's really interesting to see how much craft has sort of grown over the past 10 years because even 5 years ago, I would say there wasn't as much like the chase wasn't there. That's what threw me off on this tangent. Oh right, I'm the host. I should get us back on track. I warned you guys. Anyways, now that I've ranted and you guys have all nodded, I assume you guys are on board with my nonsense. But let's talk a bit more about Bitrot.
Sure,
So,
yeah.
I would say, I mean, to do a little transition, a little segue, I would say that the things that I like in games and the reason I'm making games are kind of the same reasons, the same sorts of things I look for in beer, right? I like you were saying, that energy of people kind of just trying things, you know, being creative and interesting, being willing to kind of go beyond just what people with a lot of money are willing to do, you know? We have the benefit of not having a lot of money.
It's a good club, isn't it?
So I mean, that's like our MO.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, we call it Bitrot. It's of course us too, and we're twin brothers. So it's just kind of like the latest iteration of stuff that we've worked on together. We worked on music stuff for a very long time, but we've kind of slowly transitioned over into working on games. We've been working on games for about 10, I don't know, like 10 years ish at this point. Mostly working for other people and then doing kind of stuff on the side. And then we just decided, you know, I saved up a lot of money. I basically lived like a monk, you know, brewing beer.
Nice.
And I took all the money that I had and I just decided, you know what would be a really great investment? Why don't we, you know, I'll break off and we'll just make our own studio and we'll make our own game. You know, at the time I was working for a studio and I wasn't particularly happy with the kinds of games we were making. I was happy that I was making games, just not those games.
Right.
Since then, I mean, Chad actually still maintains his position. He's got a cool job. So, do you want to talk about that, Chad?
Sure, yeah. I'm a senior lead gameplay engineer at Cloud Imperium Games, so working on Star Citizen, which I've been there for 6 years now, and it's been a really interesting journey because whenever I joined, it was a much smaller company than it is now. I think there was, I mean, it wasn't right at the very beginning, but we had about 200 people at the time, and now we're at like 750, I think, employees, and so the company's just completely exploded. And the number of people playing the game has grown and grown and grown over the years, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. And then on top of it, I would say that the development practices have become really a lot more amenable. When we were a younger company, it felt more like a startup, but now I think we've really matured as a company, and part of that is that we're, I think, a lot more respecting of people's time, which is why I'm able to work on a second game like on the nights and on the weekends, because I don't know, I just like games development so much. But it's also very different because I'm an engineer, right, on Star Citizen, whereas on Recursive Ruin, which is the game that we're making, I actually don't do any programming whatsoever. It's Curtis handles all the programming.
Oh.
He's a very good engineer, although I won't necessarily always tell him that. But yeah, so my contributions are mainly things like design, writing, music, art, that kind of stuff. Although we do make our own, kind of coming out of our, we mentioned we did the PhD thing, so coming out of our PhD research, we work on an open source programming language for music, generative music, and audio DSP. And so I do contribute to that project, which we use on the game to make music and do sound with. So I still do some programming outside of work. It's just not game programming.
Okay.
But yeah, so Cloud Imperium's great because they let me actually do that stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry,
Because, yeah,
Curtis, you look like
because I always hear about these, people breaking off on their own and, starting something in like their quote unquote free time. Do you ever think that you might just take the plunge as well, Chad, and just become
It's
full?
absolutely the goal. I love Cloud Imperium. I love working on Star Citizen. If any fans see this, like, oh, hey,
Yeah. I thought he was gonna dance around it lightly, but no, he's just like,
yeah. I don't
screw
get me
those
wrong.
guys.
I have no. I'm married. I have 2 kids, so like, I just bought a house. I think financially speaking, I'm kind of tied down to working a stable job for a while. So I don't think there's any danger of me leaving anytime soon. So don't worry, Chris. I can work. But like, it's absolutely, it's a dream to work on your own game full time.
Yeah.
And if we could get the game to be successful enough that it could like support me full time, that would be the best for sure.
Yeah. I like your honesty.
I mean, yeah, I have to admit, we're making it because we want to make something good. We're not really making it necessarily to make lots of money or anything. And if I had to make a bet, I don't think it will make a lot of money. And there was never been a single point where we had a decision and we were like, oh, okay, well, this one might make us more money.
Right.
So we're going to do that thing. It was just never a thought. So I figure, you only live once. You might as well, if you really love something, you might as well take a shot. So this is just me. This is us taking a shot. And we'll just see what happens.
I mean, that's why I quit my career in IT and went to grad school for my PhD nonsense. And look at me now, unemployed.
Well,
that's great.
I hate my job, so and that's why. So, unemployment, hating your job, like, I'd take the unemployment.
Yeah.
You
within reason.
Sorry, you studied in Austin? What school did you go to?
Oh, I didn't say Austin.
Oh, sorry. What did you say?
Now I don't remember what I said. I think I just said now I'm unemployed, but I think I said that my PhD nonsense.
Oh, nonsense. I thought you said Austin.
No, I did my PhD here in Bristol. That's what brought me here.
I see. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
I'm a philosopher of logic.
PhD also nonsense. I can appreciate that.
A lot of nonsense going on.
I did a degree in nonsense and then I stopped there because the PhD in nonsense would have been too much.
So I have to say that I'm really intrigued by Recursive Ruin because I don't know what it is. And it seems interesting. So for those of listeners who haven't looked it up on Steam, Recursive Ruin is a kaleidoscopic narrative puzzle game. Explore an infinitely fractal world of strange beauty and mind-bending physics. Inhabit a despondent artist in search of meaning and experience a bittersweet story that cascades into the surreal. And if you haven't watched the trailer, watch the trailer, and then you'll see why I still say I'm not sure what it is, but I'm very intrigued. So do you guys want to tell us a little bit more outside of the blurb?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would definitely recommend people watch the trailer. There's a lot of visual stuff going on that's kind of hard to describe. But if you see it, it's like very obvious kind of what's going on. Also, we just put lots of effort into it, so please just watch it. But yeah, to add on to that, if I could describe it in like a super reductive way, to try to get the idea across, it would be kind of like if you took like some kind of fractal version of Portal and then you stapled it onto Gone Home, but it was like directed by David Lynch. That's kind of what the game
Those are pretty good things, so yeah. good elevator.
So to go a bit deeper, yeah, like I said, Portal, Gone Home, there are both kind of mechanical puzzle aspects to the game, and there's like big story aspects to the game, and they're both really important. So if you're a person that really you're like, yeah, I like good stories, interesting stories. I like stuff that's a bit on the more interesting, surreal, experimental side of things, and I like interesting worlds that are a bit different and have strange physics. This is the game for you, right? The actual mechanics and the puzzles and the strange world is it's all this kind of infinitely repeating fractal. So the world itself, the entire world, is a fractal and actually contains itself inside of itself. So, sort of like a Russian nesting doll, but you can travel around in it, you know. And we have all these cool puzzles you can do where, they're like physics puzzles and things that play off of this fact that you can kind of travel around it in strange ways that you couldn't normally travel around in a normal place. It's based on this idea called a strange loop. Back in high school, Chad and I read this book called Gödel, Escher, and Bach.
Ah,
and
classic.
Eternal Golden Braid by Douglas Hofstadter. I don't know if you guys have read that one.
Yeah.
Fantastic book.
I'm a logician, so.
Yeah. Well, then, yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I'll just to throw the concept out there for people who don't know. I mean, my definition for it is something like traveling forward in some kind of hierarchical system, but somehow arriving back where you began, even though you didn't change directions or anything like that, right? So it's this weird thing where things kind of nest inside of each other. It can be like a conceptual thing. It can be like a physical thing in a kind of like impossible space. So examples of that would be like Russian nesting dolls or video feedback. You can also do it with like stories. You can do it with music. So in music theory, you can modulate. You can do key modulation, modulating by like fourths, and you'll end up back in the same key where you began. So things like that. But like, yeah, the whole world is this sort of thing, and that concept permeates the entire thing, even the story aspect of it.
Yeah.
So to kind of get into the other component, it's not just puzzles. So like, if you are like, I only like puzzles, I hate stories, don't tell me things, maybe not the game for you. But if you like that sort of stuff, we got a lot for you as well. It centers on this artist who, when you first come upon him, he's actually quite despondent, kind of has a bit of ennui, and it's not clear exactly why. So you'll come into his apartment and you'll examine objects, just like some other games where you'll hear monologues and things like that, and you'll start to pick up a bit of his background and his history, and you start to learn a little bit of why exactly he is in the state that he's in. So the game acts as both kind of a puzzle game mechanically, but also narratively. So it's a little bit of a narrative puzzle about this person's life. To start off in the game, what happens is he actually receives a package in the mail from his old apartment, but without a sender on it. And he doesn't know who it's from. He opens it up, and inside of it is an unmarked game. And when he puts that game in, that game ends up being something called Recursive Ruin. So you, the player, are playing a game called Recursive Ruin about an artist playing a game called Recursive Ruin. So there's this whole like nesting thing, right? We play this trick a lot.
Nice.
So that game that he plays, that's the infinite, like the world that you see that's all strange and infinite. We call that the infinite realms. And it's like that, it's like a pure mathematical world where things are logical and beautiful, but somewhat strange, strangely beautiful. So, yeah, that's the essential gist of it.
Yeah, I love that on a conceptual level, and as you say, you've incorporated, like, as you say, the music, the game design, the narrative in it. That's super interesting. I mean, props to you just going all in on that idea. And that's really interesting.
I mean, we're coming out of a tradition, I think, where that was like a big thing. You know, a lot of people would do concept pieces where you would just go all in on the concept, you know.
Mhm.
There's this piece called, like, for instance, Sitting in a Room, where it's literally just a person sitting in a room saying, I am sitting in a room over and over again for about an hour with
Alden
microphone
Lucier,
feedback.
one of the best electronic pieces of all time. It's unfortunately you can listen to a recording of it, but it really ruins it in my opinion, because the whole point of it is that he says this kind of like monologue about sitting in a room and records it in the space that you're in.
Mhm.
But then when he's done recording it, he plays it back in the space but records it while he's playing it back, and then keeps doing that over several iterations. And what happens is the resonances in the room of the different um, frequencies that are like more resonant for that space get emphasized more and more throughout each recording. And so by the end of it, it becomes this just wash of just like, you know, these resonances that in that space are like really particular. So that's why listening to it in a different place doesn't work as well. Because when you're actually sitting in this space, it has this like way of kind of like discovering, like kind of exposing the room itself in this kind of very fundamental way. But on top of it, just to get a little bit fancy, it's also a bit of a conceptual piece as far as like him personally, because he's known to have a lisp, and so whenever he talks, one of the things that he talks about is that he describes the process of recording it, reinforcing the frequencies. But he also mentions that it's going to smooth out his intonations of his speaking voice.
Oh.
So it's this kind of interesting kind of you know, kind of way to talk about his lisp through this kind of artwork. So I don't know, it's super interesting. Alden Lucier in general, super interesting. But to kind of bring it back to us, I guess what I would say is that this is the tradition that we come from, like that this world of like electronic music and kind of conceptual stuff, like stuff that takes itself way too seriously. Certainly is kind of like our aesthetic for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to rewatch the trailer with and listen to the music. Like, I mean, you've both got keyboards in frame, and it's just like, you know, music obviously a very integral part of the game. But I think next time I'll pay attention to that more, knowing what I know now. So that's really interesting.
Yeah,
So-
so for the trailer, all the music, the big idea there is it's kind of like this kaleidoscope of of voice. So a lot of people don't even realize it's voice actually. So, but we have just one 3-note melody that was sung, and then
Okay.
all of this outside of some prepared piano,
Mhm.
all the other sounds are basically some kind of manipulation of those 3 notes and different pieces.
Interesting. Mm.
Hmm.
I know next to nothing about music, so this is just fascinating to me. When you're talking about clefs and stuff, I'm just like, what? I know there's A to G, maybe. That's all I know.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is very high concept for me, but I love like games like this, providing that I'm able to play them, because I'll probably talk about my motion sickness later and see if you lot can combat that in any way. But something like Manifold Garden, have
I
you
was
lot
just
heard of
gonna
that?
ask
I
about
mean,
that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah, so I would be interested to know when they announced, because we were not aware of it when we started the project.
I think I followed the development on that for years. He was making it for like probably like 7 years. It was a while. So
Yeah.
you know, yeah,
we-
I can imagine that just two ships passing in the night, nobody, noticed
Yeah,
that.
so it's totally independent. I didn't know about them until I saw the trailer, like probably 2 or 3 years into
Yeah.
development. I have to admit, at the time, I was like a little bit bummed out because I was like,
Mm.
oh my goodness, somebody totally beat us to the punch, and it was very good, right?
Oh,
Like
I
it's a
really
great
enjoyed it.
game.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, my emotions aside, it's a great game. Drawing on a lot of the same ideas. It's not exactly the same. They're playing a lot with
No, I
like
would say really different games actually. Like
Oh.
ours, it's I don't want to like spoil too much about the story or anything, but I would say we're definitely more story heavy,
Yeah.
and the puzzle aspect of it is important, but not. I would argue maybe not even the most important thing. Like foundationally, really, it's about telling a particular story about this person and this kind of infinite nesting, the thing that we call the infinite realms, it serves a particular role. It's a thematic role, and it's So I don't know. Like I think that for people that enjoyed Manifold Garden, they probably would absolutely find things to enjoy about this game. But I would say they're also like very different. It's not just a clean kind of meditation on this nesting concept.
Yeah. I mean, bit reductive just to say like, oh, you know, I see something with infinite worlds and, you know, this MC Escher kind of best thing, but I think it, you know, just thinking about that made me understand a bit more, like, as you say, like the fractal nature of it. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, I mean, Gone Home is one of my favorite games of all time. So like having it, you know, center on the narrative. I mean, Aadil, you played Before Your Eyes earlier this year, and that was something that's like uses its mechanics, you know, to propel the narrative. Then
it's one of my favorite games of the year. It's super high up, and like this. I'm glad you mentioned that because I was thinking when you were first describing it, oh yeah, Manifold Garden, but of course it's a fun, some tough-ish puzzle game, but like maybe I missed the story, except the like general arc of getting through, and then having a visual feast having gone through. I didn't really pick up anything remarkable outside of that, which is again not a knock. It's just like it's not a narrative focused game.
Exactly.
And so it sounds like as you guys kept talking about both the music and the narrative, I got even more interested. Or it pulled me away from the like I think we all had this. Lucy and I had this natural like, oh, it must be similar to, because that's how human brains work, and that similarity is obviously one small part. But yeah, so the fact that the nesting doll concept, the strange loop concept, is integral, and I was just curious about if you could say more about. So the world is a strange loop of sorts, and then you mentioned earlier this music open source engine thing that procedurally stuff. He says, losing all notion of technical anything, but like. I'm assuming that's part of the game, but I mean, obviously, don't want to spoil it. But I'm really curious, given your guys's research work and presence of keyboards, what the loop and what the mechanics and the music sort of are like. So, if you could you speak a little more about that?
Yeah,
I can't.
So sure. I mean, I'll say that I think that with the music, I mean, there are pieces. Actually, we wrote a piece way back in college. What was it? Was it just called Strange Loop, Chad? I can't remember.
I think it was called. Yeah, we did it we got a undergraduate research grant for it. I remember it for that reason. But yeah.
And that one was straight up like a strange loop piece you could make, where we actually made it to where it had like this melody, and then it would do some like variations on it, and it would develop it on this like prepared piano instrument, but then it would process it, and then it kept playing faster and faster until the rhythms, because a lot of people don't realize this, but rhythm and pitch are actually basically the same thing. They're just at different speeds. So if you make a rhythm go fast enough, it turns into pitch, right? So that's what this piece did. The rhythms kept getting faster and faster until it turned into a pitch. And then the pitch melded into a note, which was that same melody at the start of the piece. And then it played it once at the end. And that was the piece. So it was like a perfect, strange loop. The music with this, we're not as like hardcore, I think, on making each piece in the game a strange loop. We're more interested, I think, conceptually getting across the emotions that are happening in the game, because there's a lot of emotional stuff that happens with it. So I would say the emotions are actually maybe the biggest thing that are guiding the pieces, but they do have conceptual angles. So like, you know, the 3-note thing that is in a lot of the pieces. So a lot of the pieces have just that one vocal melody modified in different manners all throughout. a bit like a leitmotif. I don't know if you guys know that term.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Even me and my basic
yeah.
musical knowledge know motif. Yeah.
So definitely that. And we do play, certain tricks. Like we'll do palindromes. So there's a big piece, the piece that gets used in the puzzle levels. At least one of them. It does that 3-note thing. It does this kind of development in the middle, and then in the end, when it returns, it does it in reflection. So it's the retrograde of the melody.
Oh,
processed throughout. So yeah, we're definitely conceptual, but I would say we're also trying to be artistic and emotional with it as well.
Yeah, and another part that I would add to it is that we've always been really, really big fans of feedback in all kinds of aspects. So like kind of earlier on in our artistic career, I would say that we were really exploring things like guitar feedback and noise and this really heavy music. And over time, we maintained that. So, for example, on the music in this game, there is certainly a large amount of just straight audio feedback that's happening with a lot of processing, but it's also gotten, I think, a little bit more conceptual. So, historically, we've done things with video feedback or conceptual kind of strange looping that happens. And in this piece, certainly in this game, there's a lot of this kind of thing where we'll take samples and like reprocess them multiple times, and they end up kind of re-envisioning themselves, or there's audio feedback, or there's variation, a lot of FFT. I don't want to get too technical, but a lot of FFT manipulation as well. And so I would say, just from a conceptual level, we're doing conceptual kinds of nestings, if that makes sense. But also from like a kind of more like tactical point of view, there's certainly some more direct nestings. However, Curtis is right. At the end of the day, it's a messy process. Like the whole thing about this game has been a mess. Whenever we started working on it, 4 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
5, I can't even remember now. I think 5 years ago we started working on a game, and 4 years ago it was this game, right? So it took a good year of exploration for us to really find this idea. And where we started with was a really simple prototype that Curtis had made, where he just totally hacked something together. We were throwing out lots of ideas about different kinds of games. And it's funny because this concept for us was the thing that actually we were kind of avoiding. It was the really obvious thing, because we had done so much at that point with feedback and strange loops that it was like, okay, well, why not do something different than this thing that we do all the time?
right.
But we decided that, like, hey, let's just try it out in like a game form and see if it's any good or interesting at all. And so yeah, Curtis threw together this prototype that had like a table and a chair and like a sphere, if I recall correctly, and like just a platform.
And a platform.
Yeah, and that was it. But it nested inside of itself infinitely. You could pick up the sphere and like throw it, and it would move all of them and stuff. And it looked like garbage. Like the textures were like, just the default.
Speaking
like,
of fans
Unreal.
of feedback.
Yeah. It looked like garbage. But that was good, because whenever I saw it, it was like, okay, it looks like garbage, but there's something compelling about this, right?
Yeah.
And that's what made me think, okay, I think this is actually the direction we should go, because it was the first thing that seemed really compelling, despite, having so little going in its favor. And in that time, yeah, we've developed it a lot. I don't know if Curtis, you wanted to add any more to that, but
just say in general, when we make pieces, I kind of think of it they usually come about one of two ways, which is either top down or bottom up. If it's top down, it is that kind of concept first, and everything flows from that. If it's bottom up, you kind of like are making things, and you just kind of put it together, and it builds on top of each other. This one was like weird because it has that concept thing, but it came out in a bottom up way. Kind of just jamming stuff together, putting it together. And then that's kind of how it developed from there. It was, even though it has this big concept, everything about it as kind of bottom up. We didn't necessarily envision all of it going into it. It felt a bit more like excavation, you know. So like we didn't even intend for there to be story. We did intend it, I think, to start with to be more of a Manifold Garden. I mean, portal or something.
Yeah.
Where it was more puzzle centric. But as we went along, it just wanted to be that. That's just really what it was, and it just kept coming out. We were just digging it out slowly, a little bit by bit, and it ended up being this kind of strange, beautiful thing, you know. So
I
So
mean,
with with the story, like how much of you two is in that story? Like your personalities, your upbringing, like without spoiling anything, obviously. Like how much of you putting yourselves into that story for
Very
it to be
good
such an
question.
integral part of the game, especially.
Right. I would say it's absolutely not an autobiography.
Okay.
But for sure, there are things that are drawing on our life experiences, is the way that I would put it. So, like, the main character, I would not claim is us, but I think the way that we were able to write for the game and feel authentic and feel like actually channel real emotion, I think, was to draw on those real life experiences. So there are certainly people or events or relationships that we have, you know, felt or experienced that are in there, but yeah, ultimately it is a work of fiction.
Nice. Okay.
it's a pretty. This person's dealing with something that I think is pretty common, where you
Yeah.
really want life to be a certain way, and you have certain aspirations, and things are just not. The world is not on board, you know, and it's a struggle to deal with that. He's also got some other things going on, but that's I don't want to give too much away.
yeah, that's fair. But so it's not quite a John Everyman, but certainly a John Every Feeling.
Maybe John, every artist.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, I would say for sure this idea of like this person that's into, I mean, he's into maybe more procedural or like kind of more experimental kind of art. So this angle may not be familiar to a lot of people. It certainly like speaks to like where we come from. But at the same time, I think this idea, like Curtis was saying, about like you had certain, when you're growing up, when you're going to college, whenever you're figuring out who you are as a person, you tell yourself a kind of narrative about like who you're going to be, about what you can accomplish, about what you want even out of life. And as you grow older, that changes. It becomes in some ways a little bit more naive, but also that there's also, it feels like a little bit of a loss there, that maybe you could push for those things that you really want if you were willing to sacrifice. I don't know, a little bit of a conflict of idealism and realism, and kind of meditating, I would say, on who you are as a person. So it's a very introspective game.
Yeah.
Which
I would say, yeah, for sure.
to-
There's a lot of introspection in this game.
which comes back to the themes, right? So this whole idea of like recursive ruin and infinite nesting and strange loops, it's this idea of inward looking, of looking at yourself conceptually as a person. And this involves both the idea of like what you're observing while you're observing it. I mean, there's a lot of these kind of themes in there.
That's super interesting. It also, we didn't want to let go of this, but your excavating metaphor made me realize that it sounds like you were neither top down or bottom up, but bottom down. Which
yeah, I mean, I said that taxonomy and then I immediately violated it.
but bottom down makes perfect sense, but also it speaks to kind of what you were just what Chad was just saying about what the game is. It's like bottom down makes sense if you're doing an introspective loop, because you're like thing, and then it's like, oh, actually all these other things that we're figuring out we want to do, etc. Like bottom down is a quite a personal but definitely viable approach, and that sounds exactly like what you both were describing. It just struck me that like the description of the game mapped really well to the previous description of the development.
Yeah.
You guys are living a strange loop.
Is it okay? This is another time loop game for this year, though. That's the thing.
Yeah.
No time loops.
No, there's a looping.
Yeah.
Not
They're
time.
like
Maybe not
spatial.
time. Yeah, it's spatial loop. Love a loop game. Because we're hot on those this year.
Apparently, yeah. Well, I'm done my beer. I don't know how the rest of you are doing. If you have a second, oh no, you're still going. I mean, no pressure. Lucy, do you have a second beer today?
I do not, and I'm
Okay.
still. I'm only about halfway through this one.
Okay, so this was the problem of me having a 4% blonde and you guys having hefty brews. Do you have a second beer, Chad? Nope.
I don't. Not
Cool.
on hand, at least. No.
Yeah, no worries. In which case, I might just crack into mine, and then we can.
Go for
Yeah,
it.
go for it. What is it?
It is small. No, it's from. This was given to me by my housemate Scruff when she went to Cornwall and went to Padstow Brewing and picked me up a bottle of their May Day Citra Pale Ale. It's a 5%. I don't know a lot about Padstow outside of it's probably going to be a more traditional. They're not like a craft brewer. But I was intrigued because I was like the other beer she got me was a copper ale. I was like, yes, this is a British beer, but this is a Citra Pale Ale with a name that isn't just the copper one. So I'm curious because I think this might be a good indication of just the success of craft on the smaller breweries in the UK. Doing like a little bit more.
Interesting combination to see an English pale ale with Citra hops. That definitely is indicative of some kind of
yeah. But yeah, and it is a nice. It's a proper 568 bottle. Because we don't.
Stuff.
Yeah.
We don't do 330 mils over here.
No, our bottles come big.
Yeah, you got to take it seriously.
It's a lovely color it's pouring.
Yeah.
Nice amberish.
Yeah, and like very British in that it's just got almost no carbonation. The pour, you saw it was kind of a little sloppier in the glugging because I always forget to lower the camera when I do the pour, and no one pours a beer at above shoulders. Well, I do, and I like it's just but like there was no problem because like there's no head on this thing because there's just nothing to screw up because it's just like a nice solid British ale. Oh, I'm getting a little. So the citrus definitely there. I've got. Oh wow, sorry. It's just I've got a bit of like skunk weed on the back of I want to say like a sweet citrus, but not quite. Somewhere not clementine, but like also not quite tangerine. But yeah, there's like a dankiness to this that I wasn't expecting.
That's great.
Yeah, again, I was leaning into what I thought was like a British ale because it poured and looked like a British ale, and it was like, oh, right.
Yeah, that looks like it could just have come like straight from cask. That
right? Yeah, this looks like it could have been poured.
Few bubbles on the camera, but otherwise, yeah, it looks like it could just come.
Yeah, there's more drips of condensation from me holding the bottle and then touching the glass than there are bubbles clinging to the glass.
Okay.
So yeah, really, really wet. Almost no, like you can't taste carbonation. Finish is wet. It's a little coppery. But I'm getting that Citra all the way through, but like really toned down. And it's also got this sweetness on the finish, which is throwing me off a bit. Just because I think it's because it had such a more crafty nose that I was expecting a more bitter finish, and this is actually finishing wet and a little sweet, and there is like there is definitely a hoppy finish, but it's not boisterously so. I think Lucy, you always say you want a beer to finish like a beer and finish bitter. I think you'd be on the fence / mildly disappointed just because it's just not that bitter, and I think part of that is just got this sweetness sitting on top. Although that might be my palate's still having a bit of the honey beer on it.
I think that sweetness coming from is it like a sort of caramel sweetness, like from the malts or anything? Or
No,
is
that's the weird thing. I can't quite place it. It's not
No?
malty. But again, basically everything in this beer is quite light, and it's not boisterous at any angle. It's not too fizzy. It's not too dark. You know, it's the strongest thing was that sort of Citra hoppy note on the nose, and then everything
Yeah.
else is. It definitely has a Citra in it, so it's not just like a coppery pale ale, but the coppery standard British pale ale is coming through, and the citrus actually giving it a bit of a floral and a light citrus overtones, which I didn't expect to work so well in this sort of standard British pale, but it's really working well. And this is an example of it's leaving me not dry at all. The finish is quite light, but it lasts. So the beer, the taste is inviting me back, not forcing me back. So yeah, it's I want to say the Citra, the notes coming from the Citra are making it all feel more delicate than I'm used to a type of British pale.
Okay.
It just feels like delicate. I think everything's still quite constrained. And like it's not very boisterous in the angle, but then these notes are like I said, light citrus, a bit of floral. That dankness is nowhere to be seen. It's all just kind of it's like I want to say my hands are doing like a card house. Like it's just like it's there, it's interesting, but I feel like it could collapse, and it's just not. So that's good. There's no gust of wind, so we're fine.
Okay.
But everything's just really sort of small, but well put together, balanced. That's what a card house needs, balance. I got to my own metaphor.
A little bit in the middle of a Venn diagram.
Yeah.
Just little, but everything crosses over.
Yeah, it's not like a Wiper and True, which is we've talked about at length here at the podcast, which is a local Bristol brewery. Everything is like super subtle and nuanced, but there's like a bunch of things going on, but you could easily not notice them because they're all quite light, small, but nuanced and well put together, and you could spend a long time trying to unpack it and really luxuriate. Here, I feel like there's like 3 or 4 things going on, and they're not yelling at me, but there's no nuance. It's just smaller but still balanced.
Nice.
I know that doesn't help our 2 guests who are.
You don't sit in your fine jacket in your lounge chair with your pipe, thinking about the flavors for the next hour. But sounds like an enjoyable.
Yeah, very very much. Yeah. Excellent. So now I am curious. With our 2 guests, I'm happy to go back to music and games, but I really want to know what you're playing, because I'm curious as to when you're designing a game that's quite abstract, what you go to. Is it more abstract things for like inspiration, or is it like, hey, Mario's good? Or it might have no relation to the work, and maybe it's just what you do in your downtime. But I'm curious what you guys have been playing, or games you want to like bring up of note.
I mean, I have to admit, like I think both of us really we take influence from everything, So we love games. Our 2 big passions in life have definitely been games and music ever since we were kids. But I love films. I love books. I love shows. So I'd say we take influence from all that. In some ways, I think what we are trying to do is to synthesize those sorts of things. There definitely are games out there that do the kind of more experimental stuff, but we also like to take influence from all those other things. So, I mean, as far as like just games that I'm jamming right now, right now things are very busy for me. So I actually don't even get, unfortunately, to play as much as I would like. Recently, though, I have been playing Caves of Qud. I don't know if you guys know that game.
Rings a vague bell.
I'm saying it wrong. I apologize to the developers.
QUD.
Yeah.
Of QUD.
Oh,
Yes,
I've
this
heard
one.
of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, that's familiar.
Yeah, it's a
Roguelike, fancy roguelike.
super nostalgic game because whenever we started playing games, our first exposure was the Commodore 64,
Mhm.
and one of the games that we really fell in love with was Ultima 4. And this game really brings back a lot of Ultima 4. I mean, of course, it's different in its own way, and it's doing some super interesting things. But at the same time, there's part of me that just remembers being like, whatever, 8 or something with Curtis in our room with this little, Commodore 64 staying up way too late, like breaking into prisons and making the guards mad and stuff.
Yeah. And typing totally inappropriate things into the text. Like, yeah.
Just to see.
Yeah, this game's been around for a while. I didn't realize that it was because the name was familiar. Not my kind of game, I'll admit, but it's fascinating to see like how many game designers usually, default back to that very old school RPG like game, and no matter what kind of game they're making, like a fractal first person narrative game, it's like, yeah, they always seem to just revert back to your old roguelikes and RPGs.
I mean, say it is a very interesting game. Also, like
Mm.
technologically and even in the story, it's doing some pretty interesting things. It's actually doing a lot of procedural stuff, but
Mhm.
normally, I mean, to get a little bit into the weeds, normally when people say things are generative or procedural, what they really mean is that there's like a random seed,
Yeah.
and there's like an algorithm that takes that random seed and just kind of extrapolates it to setting certain parameters, right? They're actually going a bit further with it. So they're actually doing things with machine learning and with neural networks and things to generate story and to generate, like, they have books that are totally generative that are
Oh, wow.
completely written that you can find in the world and you can read them.
Mhm.
And it's a rogue game, roguelike game.
Yeah.
And each time you play it, there's like this world. It's a really beautiful world.
Yeah. That's
And the
undeniable.
music's beautiful too. But there are like all these factions, and there's this long history to the world. And the factions, like the way they relate to each other, changed over time, and that has an impact in the way that the world is shaped now. And all of that is actually different each time you play it. So each time you play it, there's like these mythological things that have occurred in the history of the place. But it's always different. So it's always like some strange, and they're like really, I like them because they're like crazy, because they're not logical. It's it's procedural, so it'll be like the shaman from whatever rebuked the robots of Frogland, and now the world is ever known as the Brines of Dread. It's just like,
Nice.
okay, I don't know what that means, but it sounds awesome.
That's
So,
really cool. I just noticed on Steam that their last depots were 2 days ago, so it's still in early access. It's still being developed, but it's been out
Yeah, they just
for.
released what they call the Wonder Mode, which is a mode that's not a roguelike mode. So it has checkpoints in the different towns. So if you're not into the like super hardcore roguelike aspect of it, you're just looking for more of like an open world RPG.
Mhm.
This is like the mode for that. And I
Nice.
personally I like that because like Curtis, I'm old and I don't have as much time as I
Yeah.
used to. So like, sometimes like a roguelike, I love them, but it can be a bit punishing when, my PlayStation sessions can be a bit short and I kind of just want to
Yeah.
experience thing.
And move
For
forward.
myself, I'm sorry?
I said and move forward.
Yeah, and yeah, get progress at all,
Yeah.
right? Rather than just like start over all the time. But for me, I've
part
been
of it,
playing Oxenfree, which is something
Ah.
that I had always wanted to play and just kind of missed out on and had some time and went back to it. I enjoyed it a lot. It's a kind of game that I like a lot. It's very story focused. It actually ended up being super different. I don't know how much spoilers I want to give away since it's so
6 years old at
story-driven.
this point, isn't it? Like, I
Yeah.
think you're
Right.
fine.
I mean, but also if you want to encourage listeners to play the game and don't want to spoil it for them, by all means. I mean, it's been on my list for
Talk about it.
ages as well, and I think I was in the
Right.
same boat. Never quite got around to it.
Yeah, I mean, I won't necessarily directly spoil it, but I'll say it was very different than I thought it was going to be from a story point of view. I knew, basically as much as like a screenshot, which is like, okay, it looks like some kids on the beach.
Okay.
Right? We went in like expecting it was just going to be like, a teen drama kind of thing, and it was like,
Breakfast
oh
Club
no,
on the
it's a
beach.
thing.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed it. It's not a perfect game. I imagine if I played their more recent games that I could probably see where they had learned from this. In some ways, I think that some of the like character arcs and some of the kind of ways that they thread the story together, it felt a little I don't want to say primitive, but I would say formative, right? That they had clearly
Absolutely,
some
yeah.
good ideas, but it seemed like maybe there was still some workshopping to do to really make it come together.
Yeah.
Although I think I saw that they're making a sequel, so I'm
Yeah.
interested.
I think it's
I'm
coming
not sure
out
how quite it
next
turns
year.
into a sequel. Yeah.
They got bought by Netflix, which was weird, but
Oh, I forgot
right.
that.
I saw that,
Yeah.
you're
yeah,
right.
Night
That's
School
wild.
Studio. But yeah, I think Oxenfree 2 is coming out next year. I think previews went up for it recently, so I guess it's very much on the horizon. But yeah, just going back to what you said, that kind of like dialogue system just felt very fluid and natural, and you see it in their other games, which I think have had mixed success. I think nothing's been as big as Oxenfree for them, because I've had a game on like Game Pass and Apple Arcade, but they do like dialogue and character better than most people, and yeah,
I love
I
their
really like their
dialogue.
games. Yeah,
It
absolutely.
felt super natural, and it
Mhm.
also kind of encouraged you
Supernatural.
to kind of live in the moment, right? So like somebody would say something, you feel like, okay, if I don't respond right with my kind of like a gut immediate initial response, I might not get to. But
Yeah.
it's nice because it also makes you kind of regret things, which feels more real in some ways. Because
Yeah.
for me, I would sometimes respond to something and then reflect on it and be like, actually, I wish I didn't say that quite in that way.
Mhm.
But I like that it was an interesting idea to have the main character have a different way of expressing themselves. Like you could even pick details about their background that would be true,
Mhm.
right? Depending on what you set, which I had not seen, I think, another game do or that I can remember. So yeah, I think that part of it was definitely one of the most successful, and I think the main character was written really well.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think they did a really good job with her. There was a couple of the side characters I wasn't as excited by, but I think the main character was really well done.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the second game for sure. I'm just so happy that you went in completely blind, because it seemed like one of those games that it's been around for quite some time now. Not just that, it had its like kind of wave of success and hype. So I'm glad you went into that not knowing. That's cool.
Yeah, it's kind of like how I wish people would play Doki Doki Panic, or not. Sorry, Doki Doki Literature Club.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It was inevitably going to get spoiled by the Twitter sphere.
Yeah,
Right, yeah.
played it quite early, so I was okay. And I remember me and Ben were looking at old episodes that we recorded, and it's like I was trying to describe Doki Doki Literature Club without
Describing it.
describing what other game it was like, because that would have just spoiled it, inherently. So yeah, hard one to
It's
talk
like, I
around.
know, just play it. I promise.
Yeah.
But I mean, those are my favorite types of recommendations. Are they just play it? Don't just trust me. And they come from a good source. And like, yeah, sure. Although I think Lucy's done that a handful of times to me, and I haven't played the game.
Yeah. Have you played the Obra Dinn yet?
Oh, that's a great game.
Yeah, he still
Yeah.
hasn't played it.
And it's become so. During my PhD, I had a lot of PhD guilt. I just finished last May 2020.
Oh, I get
I
that.
can
And
relate.
so
I really-
games that were like, will grip you, or were long, or like, no, I shouldn't start those because then I won't work and I'll just do that, which isn't the case because I know how to time manage, but definitely was in my head for so many years. And then it's like, oh right, this game everyone's told me about. I need to carve out some time for it, forgetting that that's just never how I play games. So like my like need to play games are almost always on the list and never turned on because my brain is not doing myself justice, and I know this, and I can describe this to people, and I will still do it. The one exception was like last Christmas or whatever, before our end of the year. I like was like, okay, I got Hades. I know everyone loves it. Fuck it, I'm gonna play it. And then it gripped me, and I lost days to it. Although I mean, I still did other things, but boy, did I play that game a lot more than I normally play games. And that was great. It was also the luxury of having finished the PhD and being on the job market freshly and not feeling the pressure of, oh, I should be writing more to publish to try and blah, right? It was just like, I deserve a break. It's Christmas time. I'm going to play this game a lot. But I think I'm finally coming around to just picking up a game.
You're playing lots, to be fair, you know, so... Just be like me and think it's always Christmas and not give a damn and play everything.
Well, so my partner is in a different town, and I've been taking my Switch on the train. And speaking of nostalgia, I picked up a game that I hadn't actually played since the first week I got it. Well, yeah. So I bought the Link's Awakening remake years ago whenever it came out. And I got through 3 instruments or whatever. And then I was just sitting on the train and I was like, oh, what? There's a game in the cart slot? That's weird. I almost always just play downloaded codes or like review games or whatever, or just buy stuff on the eShop. Sure enough, it was Link's Awakening. It's been in the slot for years. And I was like, oh, I should play that. What a charming game that game is. I forgot how nice it is. And it's
cute. Yeah. And it runs not great, but...
Yeah, I could have done without the tilt shift, even though I think it's adorable because I know it's a strain on the Switch. But like, it brought me back to like the dungeon I played on the train was like, I remember this dungeon. But I remember this dungeon in terrible 2-inch by 3-inch Game Boy because I also was at my parents' place in Calgary because I visited home a month and a half ago, and I found my Game Boy in a box, and it had Link's Awakening in the slot. Apparently, I just leave Link's Awakening and things. But obviously, I didn't have batteries around or whatever. But it was just like,
I was about to say, did it turn on?
I mean, I could have checked. I just I was helping them pack because they were selling their house, so I was just like, keep in box, marked my stuff, don't sell. Yeah, it was really interesting to have the memory of the game. Just like I had the vision. I don't often have super visual memories, but I had the visual memory of playing through that, like bits of that like that boss fight, basically, like almost superimposed in my brain of watching this very twee, plasticine tilt shift version of that fight. And it was like, let's call it cognitive resonance instead of cognitive dissonance. Like, it was really interesting, and because it wasn't distracting me, because I was still able to be like, oh, right, this is how the fight works. I remember, but also I remember in a totally weird ass way that I am like having a visual memory of. It doesn't match, but it does enough. It like matched with enough, core characteristics, but not aesthetic ones. It was a really interesting experience. But also, yeah, play that game if you haven't. Ideally on the Game Boy. Not Advance or Color, but the Game Boy.
Yeah. I still have mine. I don't know if it turns on though. Unfortunately.
You know what else I found?
We didn't have a Game Boy, unfortunately. Yeah.
Oh, what was your... So after the Commodore 64, what...
We had, what was it? We had a Sega Genesis. I'm trying to remember all the different consoles we had. We had Commodore 64.
Genesis. I mean, we played a bunch of Super Nintendo games on Friends, and eventually we got one, but it was kind of after it was as big.
That's what I did. When the N64 came out, I bought a SNES at a garage sale.
Yeah.
And then played those games.
So, ended up going back and playing like Super Metroid and Chrono Trigger and all
Yeah.
those games, which are utterly amazing. But yeah, like growing up, we had a Commodore 64 for a very long time, and then like a Sega Genesis, and then like a Super Nintendo, and eventually, like what do we have after the Super Nintendo?
We didn't have an N64. We
GameCube.
skipped.
We
We
kind of
just skipped
skipped the
them.
game.
I did as well. Yeah.
We got GameCube
Yeah.
next, I think. That
Ah,
was like, yeah.
like an
a long time.
adulthood.
We did PC gaming. We played games on the computer, right? So we were
Mhm.
doing a lot of PC games.
I
Yeah.
mean, that was my bread and butter as well. I literally had the Genesis SNES when the N64 came out, and then nothing, just the PC. And because of that, that's how I like learned how to build computers, etc. Because it was like, oh, I can't trust Dad to buy a, I don't want him to buy a Pentium 2 by HP. Hold on a second. How do I get a better thing? But yeah, and
Yeah,
so I got a PS3, and the only reason I did was because it played Blu-rays and I had a home theater. Like I built a home
Nice.
theater with a
Yeah,
projection in my basement.
Yeah, it was like Curtis got a GameCube. I think I did not, but I played things on his.
Mhm.
And then I ended up getting a PlayStation 2 at some point, but it was right before the PS3 was going to come out. And then ended up just getting this huge collection and spent forever playing like a bunch of games that I had played at other people's houses, like Final Fantasy X and stuff like that. But definitely, I've always been kind of slow on the console game because I don't know. I think just because I started kind of behind, and so it's just felt correct to just be like kind of a generation behind on the console.
Yeah.
So I'm still playing a bunch of PS4 games right now, right? And I'll probably wait to get a PS5 until I don't know, like a year from now or something.
I think that's
I mean,
just smart, really.
yeah.
There's nothing to play on that system.
Right.
I mean, when
also
I-
I could
yeah.
get one and there's nothing to play.
Yeah, and games are super cheap, and well, like when I had a PlayStation, I was still renting like NES and Sega Master System games. So I was just like, might as well trade in like Croc Legend of the Gobos for 65 NES games.
I mean, that would have been a shrewd trade if you kept on to held
Yeah,
on to it.
nobody would have taken Croc. I'm sure I still have the disc.
Yeah. I also found from when I found a in shrink wrap Super Mario World. Because
Really? Wow.
which I got at a garage sale years later, that someone was just like, oh, I bought this for my son, and then someone else bought it for him, so I found it and I was like, I will take that. And now it's probably worth a pretty
Sell
penny
it, man.
because it's like in wrap with its like $24.99 sale price sticker still on the wrap.
So is that copy in Calgary or in
It's in
Bristol, or-
Calgary, yeah.
Where do you live again in Calgary?
Get off my weird Nintendo stuff. Yeah, it was a very odd trip home. Where it's like, oh, and I was there for a while, but just not quite enough to like put things on eBay while.
Yeah.
But I also found a whole bunch of stuff that I had left there that they needed to get rid of, and so I donated to Value Village. Swings and roundabouts.
Yeah.
Lucy, did you have a game you wanted to talk about?
No, I'm still thinking about Metroid Dread and how I don't want to play anything else. And I just haven't had time, so I'm good. I want to ask a question to the guys.
Yeah, go for it.
Since, as you say, like music, one of your earliest passions, let's keep it with video games. What are the best soundtracks in video games, even now or growing up?
I keep it old school.
A very good question. I mean, for me, the things that immediately strike me as some of my earliest and strongest memories related to music are RPGs. So Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger are like way up there. And even more recently, Nier Automata for me has an utterly amazing soundtrack that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
So those are like the games that whenever someone just says like game music to me, they like immediately pop into my mind. I don't know if Curtis, you had a different initial reaction.
For me, I think the one that had a big influence, and still to this day, I have a lot of respect for, is the Super Metroid soundtrack.
Yes.
It's
That's it.
beautifully
Yeah.
evocative. And it's very strange in a really interesting way. It has like these kind of mellotron voices that it uses throughout, and it gives this incredible sense of like the world and everything and the strangeness of it, but also the beauty of it.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff that we're still trying to channel in a way to this day. Is this kind of strange beauty. Like that's just my jam. I'm very much into that.
Yeah, I love that soundtrack. That was the one, a bit disappointing thing about Dread, where it's like the soundtrack was. I mean, you're never gonna get as good as Super Metro, but I think it was just a bit underwhelming. But yeah, like I don't play RPGs. I'm not a fan of them. Like generally, I didn't grow up with them. I think that's most of the reason why. But like, I will absolutely just listen to Final Fantasy music all day. Like, I have no affinity with that franchise whatsoever. But like, play one of those songs, it's just like, yes, this it is, the peak. But Super Metroid, so.
I mean, this is one of the things that I really love about Spotify, to be honest. Not to be a shill for a corporation that doesn't pay artists enough, but like having access to like the fact that so many video game and movie scores are just like there, and like not just the soundtrack, but the scores and stuff. Because, well, why not? We might get a few pennies instead of nothing because no one's bought the backlog of CDs that are in Big Joe's lot. Like, it's really great, but also you then get, like, because they're more accessible, you've got some really cool, especially in gaming, just because of the overlap, like you guys, of people who are musicians and gamers. You get really cool remixes, and a lot is being done with, especially because of the like you said, the Chrono Triggers and the Final Fantasy 6 is like the limitations of the SNES and the Genesis chips on what they could do means that there's so much more you can like extrapolate and like do. And I've heard some really compelling versions of the bleeps and bloops. I don't mean to diminish how good those soundtracks sounded, but you know what I mean. Like, just like the limit, there was like a ceiling on what they could do, and they did a lot of really great music that moved people and is memorable, like Super Metroid. And then to have people have all the technology of today, or even just orchestra, like, or instrumentation or whatever, just do that but different. It blows my mind, and it's like always interesting, even if just that. And I think the attachment to, I recognize this from game I played, is different from, oh, this is someone playing a classical piece in a really interesting way. Like, there's a different type of attachment because you were involved when you were hearing the music, and it was sort of part of your performance of the game, if you will. And so, like, I find that some, like, a remix of a game that I've played is very different from even a song I like because of that. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Konami music, like sorry, those bleeps and bloops, as you call it, those MIDI bleeps and bloops, like I think Konami were doing it better than anyone back in those days. And it's just like, yeah, I'll just go listen to like some randos who's got like 10 views on YouTube's like cover of Bloody Tears. Why not? It's gonna sound good anyway because the source material's
on
awesome.
Twitter, actually. Castlevania is another good one. I should have said that. Castlevania is amazing. But in defense of the bleeps and bloops,
I wasn't attacking. I didn't mean to.
I think that you're right when you say when you're talking about limitations. I think that's totally right, because we were talking about conceptual stuff before, and I think just for when you're being creative, I think one of the biggest roadblocks to making something is the kind of like blank page.
Yeah.
Right. If you're like actually writing the sheet music. But just like the starting from nothing is extremely difficult. It's way better if you have something that gets you going. So limitations are really good for that. Concepts are also really good for that. So I think that the limitations of the systems inspired a lot of really beautiful, a lot of beautiful music you would not have gotten otherwise. And it's the kind of music that really is built for that instrument. Like those are like beautiful instruments that have certain voices, and they're playing with them. So I do like to hear other versions. I like to hear other versions of all sorts of music, including game music. But I have to admit, a lot of times I do think it maybe loses a little bit of the
Mm.
original energy. You know, like I was just listening to different I heard every single like remix version of Bloody Tears back to back in some YouTube video recently. And I was like, you know what? The original is just that one's fire.
Yeah.
Like that's the
everything else
jam.
they have pretty good. The original is really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you
Yeah,
brought
what I
that.
would add to that is just from a like kind of composer's perspective, just to get a little music geeky for a moment. Curtis is absolutely right that the limitations are a lot of the reason why the music sounds the way that it does. Like today, we don't have those same limitations. Back then, they were working with a fixed number of voices, that a fixed number of kind of oscillators that they can use, and they only had certain kinds of effects that they could do, and even a certain number of like notes that could be playing at the same time. What that meant is you were forced into writing in a certain kind of way. Like you had like one noise track or maybe two, depending on the console, right? So you were kind of forced into this place where you had a kind of forced fixed polyphony that meant that if you wanted to like have some more complex harmony, so you think back to something like a Chrono Trigger or a Final Fantasy VI. One of the interesting things about that music is they're using a lot of extended harmony. So these are things like major seventh chords or ninth chords. And the thing is, there's a lot of notes in those chords, more notes than there are voices in the consoles that they're using. So they're using a lot of tricks in order to kind of evoke this complex harmony, where they're doing certain kinds of oscillations or arpeggiation. So you'll get this music where it's doing this do 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 do, and it's like it's beautiful, but also they literally can't play that chord without doing that. It's not possible on the console.
Interesting.
So it's kind of forced them, like you can imagine you're some, composer way back in the 80s and you're playing all this stuff. It's like he's talking to like the programmer and then he's like playing these things. He's like, hey, can I do that? And the programmer's like, no, you can't do that. He's like, okay. Well, let me think. Okay, well, can I do this? And there's this interesting feedback loop, the technology that forced them to write in a certain way that nowadays, because you can do whatever you want, I feel like music in games lately has become much less melodic, actually, because they have so much access to interesting timbral palettes. They can lean on a sample set, or they can lean on just some big, fancy sound effect or some big effect, like, some from some orchestral thing to sound a certain way. Whereas, back on like a Super Nintendo or a Nintendo, if you wanted your piece to sound grandiose or to sound epic, right? You have the same firepower that everybody else does. If a Final Fantasy game wanted to sound more epic than a different game, they had to do it with just notes. Like that's it. They got, I feel like, a lot more creative, and they forced themselves to really be thinking about the melodies that they're writing, about the harmonies, the inner voices, how they interlock, counterpoint. There's a lot there. It's super interesting. I think limitations are one of the best creative kind of devices.
Absolutely.
It also strangely kind of aligns with Baroque music, like because of the counterpoint aspect of it, like Chad was talking about, and all the arpeggios. If you go back and you listen to harpsichord music, there's a lot of crossover between game music and Baroque harpsichord music. So kind of strange.
just because similar limitations, like happenstance.
Yeah, I mean, back then it was like there wasn't, with a harpsichord, definitely you could smash all the keys at the same time if you wanted, but there weren't technical limitations. It was more just like aesthetic limitations. That was just.
I would also say the difference is that the instrument itself has a really short decay. So whereas like the piano, you can hold down the sustain pedal and you can get a good chord that'll sustain for a while. But a harpsichord is just like dink, dink, dink. Right. So if you want this kind of rolling, big, kind of enveloping chord, the only way that you can do it is like you kind of have to keep arpeggiating the notes.
Oh, interesting.
So I would say it is a technical limitation.
So you guys have just reminded me that I mean, big FF7 fan. I agree, FF6 is technically better, but FF7 hit me at the right time. Like I fully like acknowledge that like the narrative is more interesting, and like I think it's a tighter game in a lot of ways, 6, but 7 just was my introduction to Final Fantasy outside of the original NES cart, which We never got past the first boss because we didn't understand, me and my sisters, that you had to grind to play. So it's just like, like we only had a couple encounters with goblins. We got to the castle, sweet. Oh, we got to the boss, massacred. And it was like, I don't know what to do. This game's busto. Versus, oh, we're supposed to spend an hour and a half in the forest. Anyway, that was my sidebar to my sidebar. FF7 Remake came out. Phenomenal game. Really appreciated the approach to the remake not being a full, it's not a remaster, we'll put it that way. It's definitely doing other things, and I think in a good way that made it exciting to play while still balancing the nostalgia. But one of the things I didn't like was the orchestral version of the soundtrack. I found it oddly dull. And this is why you reminded me of like that, like something you were saying in the defense of the bleeps and bloops, and it's like I loved FF7 soundtrack so much. I've played that game so much that like so many of those melodies are in my brain, but hearing them in the remake, but not.
Did they get a live orchestra? I thought that was the whole thing with that game. They didn't have a live orchestra for it or something. I can't remember.
No, actually.
No, but yeah, I played through it and it was absolutely, I had the same sort of feeling about it, which was that all the melodies and everything got very muted, you know, because all the instruments are very, you know, action-packed, jammed in the original. But everything got kind of smoothed over in the remake because an orchestra is very big. There is a lot of repetitions of instruments, so it tends to smooth over detail. If you want something punchier,
become much more muted.
Right. So generally what you will do if you're like a classical composer, you want something really punchy, you write for string quartet. Because string quartet, each instrument's really going to come through and all the attacks are going to be very apparent. But when you blow it up to an orchestra, you know, the attacks become much more muted. Everything gets gets smoothed over a bit. And that's how I felt about that music, because I actually thought it would have been more appropriate to a smaller ensemble if that's what you wanted to do. But maybe the most appropriate ensemble was the original, you know, console.
the chip. Yeah.
And also, like, I have to admit, like, the stylistic kind of changes where it's like, we're going to take a piece and then make it like a jazz rendition. I don't know. Maybe I'm just an old man, so I'm sorry if I'm like sounding like old man.
I remember there was some controversy about the orchestral like piece in Final Fantasy VII Remake, though. I just can't remember what it is. I don't know if it was the way they recorded it or the way they put it into the game, but I know there was definitely something, and that's why people were like saying it doesn't quite hit. So.
I thought it was just that it wasn't the old soundtrack. Like
I heard something. I can't remember what it is, so don't quote me. But yeah, there were complaints about it. So
that's fair. I mean, my complaint is very simple. I just think it was flatter, and you've explained why it sounds flatter, which is really interesting because I don't have that knowledge, and now I do. So thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for these big melodies that are really sweeping, an orchestra can be really good because you get like, you know, 10 violin players playing that melody or even in harmony, and it has this kind of rich and fullness that you cannot capture with the single violin. Because there's a combination of slight timing differences. Even when the players are extremely good, there's going to be some slight timing differences.
Right.
And then on top of that, there's going to be slight tuning differences on the frequency. So there's both a temporal and a frequency kind of smattering that's happening, kind of a cloud, right?
A wash, yeah.
And so you get this really full, bigger than life sound on the melodies. But because of that, like Curtis was saying, the rhythms become a little bit less attacky. Whereas like on a string quartet, you get the inverse. The attacks are really tight. So if you've ever listened to something by Bartok, he's got this really amazing, super rhythmic music. It's like metal, but on string quartet. It's amazing. But you know, the melody isn't maybe going to be, you know, going to sound like it's coming from a movie because it's just like going to be like a single viola or a single violin that's playing the hell out of it, but it just doesn't sound like supernaturally big. Yeah.
Right.
I could listen to you two talking about music all day. I mean,
yeah, I was going to say
picking up on probably like 25% of what you mean, but it's just all super fascinating, you know. So, as someone who's just like tone deaf like me.
I go. Now you've piqued my curiosity. Now I'm curious. What instruments do you guys play?
So
My instrument is guitar, but also play piano. I can play trumpet, although at this point it's gotten rather rusty. Same thing with euphonium, and some
There's a
various
rusty
like percussion
trombone
and
joke
stuff.
there
But
that I'm not going to make.
guitar is, yeah, guitar is like my main thing. And Curtis,
Okay.
yeah, I play bass and contrabass. When we first started,
Wait, is
you
that
know,
just the bass line from Contra?
yeah.
Sorry, you were saying.
that's all he knows how to play. Actually,
Yeah. It's like I play bass, but only this.
Only this. Yeah, so when we first started playing, I learned trombone, Chad learned trumpet, and like we were just young kids, and we wanted to play like a cool instrument, so we were learning those instruments in school, for band. So we taught ourselves guitar and bass, and Chad learned guitar because he knew the treble clef, and I learned bass because I knew the bass clef. That's how it all got started.
Nice.
But I picked up contrabass after that.
I at one point played the banjo. That's all I've got.
The kazooie.
Good
It's a great.
instrument.
Yeah, I wanted to pick it up a bit. I had a friend. We had a friend back at Mills where we did our masters that played banjo. It always seemed like an interesting instrument. Has a kind of similar limitation as the harpsichord, right? Where it's got this really limited sustain, so it kind of forces you to keep, playing, keep the activity going. And there was actually, there was another band. There was like kind of a noise folk band that would play with like banjo, and they would sing. It would be like, it was like two people singing like banjo, and I think maybe like a bass mandolin or something like this. And it was an interesting duo.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I mean, yeah, the trick to the banjo is just learning the roll patterns and then realizing that, like, boy, there's not a lot of chord changes to most banjo music. It just sounds complicated because you're hitting a lot of notes, but you're hitting those notes in a very straightforward manner. I'm like, oh,
Yeah. And
yeah,
also a lot of like hammer-ons and pull-offs and
Yeah.
fills and things. Yeah, there are
It
tricks.
reminds me of I saw a video a tweet. Yeah, it was a tweet on Twitter, of course, from a composer who was a piano player, like many composers are, but sort of picking up guitar. And he said that he had always wondered why so much guitar music was in E. And then, like, immediately, the first moment that he picks up a guitar, he's like, oh, okay. And for non-guitar players out there, the bottom and top strings are the note E. So just all the music's in E, basically.
yeah.
I can maybe play Three Blind Mice on the piano, so
That's pretty good.
that's as much as I can do.
It's better than the mice could.
Just literally the first few seconds, but that's about it.
Yeah, I grew up
I'm not
playing
even
piano.
I can find the C, so one that would like, and that's about
That's all
it.
you need.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope this game we stuck mostly to like a standard tuning. I'm hoping next time we can do something that's a bit standard.
Mhm.
There are all sorts of tunings you can do that don't follow like the normal pitches that you get on a piano. They follow these different sorts of mathematical ratios, and they're
Even
really
non-mathematical ones. Yeah. So I don't know. Are you guys familiar with like Indonesian gamelan, for example?
No, but
It's
please.
beautiful. It's basically there are these ensembles that have these keyed instruments that you play with mallets and these big gongs, and the music is performed by an ensemble of like 20 or 30 people. They'll also have like a drum that like helps direct it, and sometimes a string player. And it's amazing music, but the super interesting thing about it is that historically each ensemble was kind of based in like a village, right? And they were hand making these things, of course, for a long time, because that's how the only way you could do it. And for that reason, the tuning of the instruments for each particular village's gamelan is different. So there's not like a consistent tuning, but at the same time, there is some kind of consistency roughly. So there's these things called like Paylog and Slindro, which are like the two main tunings that they use. But still, any particular village's Skymelon's Paylog will be slightly different than
That's
each other.
fascinating.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and all the instruments are built to it. Yeah.
I mean, it's just cool because like it can't be played on Western instruments. Like the music just cannot be played on the piano at all. It's
Interesting.
kind of amazing.
I'm gonna have to look this up because it sounds incredible.
It reminds
just-
me of. Go on.
No, after you.
Oh, just like it reminds me of so in 05, I don't remember. Many years ago, I was traveling through North Africa, and in Morocco I bought a gimbri, which is a North African stringed instrument, like a traditional stringed instrument, which is like a hollowed out tree like trunk with camel back stretched over it, and then goat intestine strings, and it's 3 strings, and it's just like a pole, like it's just a pole, and then like leather thongs like tying the strings, and there's 2 at the top of the pole and then 1 a third of the way down. The reason I did was just like, oh, I know how to connect things in history. This is one of the precursors of the banjo, because the banjo obviously came from Africa originally, because of course it has a high string and 2 low strings, but tuning that is like trying to push these like really tightly tied leather thongs to stretch out this piece of goat intestine, and you just kind of make it so that it works with itself and do a thing that is music, but in a completely divorced way from I grew up getting piano lessons, and then I had a dabble with the guitar, and then I found the banjo. Like it was just like and it was very freeing, because it's just I'm not great at music, so it's not like I could easily be like, I can now translate things, like, and like there's no frets obviously, so it's just like wherever you put try and pin down on this thin piece of tree one of the strings such that you'll get tone, and then just make the thing make music. And it was really interesting, and unfortunately it got broken during one of my moves. One of the strings broke, and it was just not easily repairable in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Yeah, I think my friend plays that. They're beautiful sounding instruments.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I'll say is there's an interesting that happened in Western music, at least, where we instituted this concept of equal temperament. And it's interesting in that it's both a technical evolution, but I also think in some ways kind of we lost something in the process. So I don't know like how familiar you might be with Bach's music, but there's a really famous collection of pieces he has called the Well-Tempered Clavier. And the reason why it's called the Well-Tempered Clavier is because it was a collection of pieces particularly using instruments that were tuned in equal temperament. Before, they were using like mean tone or something closer to a just intonation. But the problem with those kinds of tunings is that it means that when you modulate keys from the like bass tuning of the instrument, it gets more and more out of tune for that key. So equal temperament was a kind of technological evolution that would allow you to play in any key on the instrument and have it be equally out of tune, right?
Right.
That was an evolution. So like your octaves are always going to be doubled, but your perfect fifth isn't quite exact. Your perfect fourth, your seventh, these ratios are a little bit fudged to be equal divisions of the octave rather than the perfect overtones that you expect from the harmonic series. But the advantage is that you can do this modulation. That's why you listen to a lot of Bach's music, and he'll have these like fugues that are modulating across all these different keys, playing all these different melodies. And he was kind of experimenting at the time with this new idea about like, I can do all these different keys. But I think the thing that's lost is nowadays we're stuck with this equal temperament, and a lot of our music that we write, again, in like more Western music, is this kind of fixed thing. We stay mainly in one key, but we still use this equal temperament. So I feel like we both have the the restrictions of equal temperament being maybe not an ideal tuning for like a particular key, but don't even use it for the thing that it's really good for, which is like modulation. I don't know.
Interesting.
Yes.
So
I can see how you did a PhD on like music.
Oh man, now you've brought up a can of worms. Now because I want to press you guys. You mentioned music and informatics or music and technology, but that means a lot of things. And to me, very little in one sense. Like, so I'm curious. Like, obviously, you're long away from that, but I'm just curious as to what that research was like, and like what does it mean to work in those fields? Just give a flavor for what the research is, because also you mentioned that you were working on an open source library, etc. But I'm just more curious, just like, okay, so what did you do? Like, you guys are clearly music heads, and now have at if you've got a captive audience.
You know, I would say that the language thing definitely played into it, because what we were doing is we were coming out of, like we said before, kind of compositional performance tradition, and it's a kind of tradition of people who are experimenting, really. So like way back when, Bach was experimenting with things, and nowadays we're still banging things around to see what we can do with it. So this was just the same sort of thing. It was about 10 years ago. So what we were really banging around with at the time was ways of performing with computers. So live performance was like a really large component. So how can you, like the questions were like, how can you perform with a computer live, and what kind of music does that perform, and what kind of things can it do, and how's that different than like a traditional instrument? So one of the things that you could do that our professors did, they started doing this way back in the 70s, um, is this: you can actually network the computers, and you could create these kind of musical systems that interact with each other, like a really low level. So like you can't have, for instance, in a normal ensemble, you couldn't have your guitar sending messages to the piano and then them like interact with each other on the instrument level, right? Like that's not possible, but that's a thing you can do on the computer. You could have two people playing two different computers, and their systems could be interacting with each other and communicating with each other in this really integral way. So they called that, I mean, there was different names for it. The kind of name that you'll see for it these days is like network computer music, but that sounds kind of but you should go check out the League of Automatic Music Composers, because this was back in the late 70s, and they were doing the bloop bloops, because that's all they had back then. They were using computers way back then, and you'll notice, like, man, this actually sounds like a Nintendo exploding. It sounds like a Commodore 64 like melting. It's very experimental, right? Just to give you a heads up, but it's really amazing. And so we were doing the same sorts of things, only we were exploring. Chad was making a programming language that would do live coding. So you would actually be programming the music on stage, and then our computers would be connected to each other, and we'd be each programming our own system, and our systems would be interacting with each other. And then we also had these like visualization systems that were based off of the music as well. It was almost like a third performer, right? That was like keyed off of like the messages that were floating around. And yeah, so now we're using the same thing to this day to make music for this game. It's probably like totally not appropriate. It's not kind of what it was meant for, but that's how we make music, so that's what we're doing. Did you want to say something more about it, Chad?
I mean, so the live coding language stuff is certainly part of it, but another big part of it was kind of 3D environments. So this is how we got into the games industry. So we don't have computer science degrees, right? But somehow we both ended up with engineering degrees engineering jobs in the industry at one point. And the reason why is because as we were developing our kind of aesthetic and figuring out the kind of music that we wanted to make, it became more and more technical. We became more interested in these more difficult to achieve things. And a big part of that was this idea of collaboration. So like my PhD and same with Curtis's was very focused on collaborative computer music. And a lot of computer music is is just you by yourself. You kind of hit play or hit record and that's it. And we wanted something that was a lot more interactive, a lot more live, that felt more like, you know, maybe the jazz sensibility or noise music sensibility, but with a computer music performance. And so we were building 3D environments that were the instrument itself that you collaborated with, as well as like a visualization. So you get this crazy 3D environment, and you're like, you know, for example, to give you an idea of one of them, there was one called Shugoth that I made that was a series of these islands in space that would change shapes as you controlled them. So they had all these different kind of topologies, but the topologies drove a wave terrain synthesis. So it would change the timbre, as well as there was different kinds of chains of sequences you could make that would play on the terrain itself. So it both changed the rhythm of the music and the sound of the music as you manipulated these things. And you had 4 different people, like we were in this band, me and Curtis, called Glitchlich. And we would do these performances. You have 4 different people just piling these things on and moving them around and deleting them and changing things. It just becomes like utter chaos, right? And it's all about just trying to figure out in the moment what anybody's doing. You get all these accidental interactions. There's a lot of feedback. You know, we talk about feedback, a lot of feedback that's happening. So, you know, you'll do something and it'll have this chain effect of like causing something else to start going crazy, and then somebody hears that and they'll change something else. So that was like the main energy that we wanted to channel, which is this really exciting live interactive experience, but in this 3D environment. And then from there, we learned, you know, the technical skills that we needed, like linear algebra and C++, that kind of thing, to then get into the industry. And nowadays, for the music that we're writing, it's a little bit less, I would say, about like the live aspect of it, because now we're focused on games music. But I would say the sensibility of the kind of channeled chaos and the kind of unexpected is definitely still a really big part of our aesthetic.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
I'm really interested to hear the music in your game, especially now. Are you gonna have a separate soundtrack released alongside of it, or you planning that, or?
Yeah, I mean, we will see. It would be cool if there's interest for it. I think we would definitely do it.
Nice.
I mean, at the very least, I think we can throw it up on Bandcamp and let people listen to it.
Yeah.
Or like a deluxe edition, as Steam often has. Speaking
Yeah,
of
exactly.
call for it, I'm curious, as you guys like have been developing for a while, but like this is your first game. Do you do the like community interaction thing? I know it's like you're getting to the point where releases next year, right? Like I've known. So like yeah, are you, or do you have like a Discord, or like are you interacting yet with the community? I know you just sort of, when did the trailer come out? I've forgotten.
Like a month ago.
Yeah. So like reasonably recently, but that's I'm assuming that was the big, hey, we exist push, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So are you? So do you have sort of more of a interaction with the community thing? / are you planning on that? Or are you happy to be your vision together? Here's what we made.
I mean, yeah, it's interesting, just that whole vibe, because you know we come from a background of composers where you kind of make the thing and you put it out in front of people, or you improvise the thing on stage. So it's interesting now that it's actually become standardized. We're making this thing where it's standardized, where you have this like dialogue with your community, and I think we don't necessarily come from a background where that was the normal thing to do.
Mm.
I would say for this game, we are definitely going to have a beta test. So we're going to have a beta test. We're going to have beta testers, and we're going to be putting it through some testing and definitely getting feedback from people. I don't know. I don't think we'll have like an open beta test though.
Yeah.
It doesn't. This game in particular doesn't really lend itself to that, because there's like these story elements. It's like in some ways we made like kind of the worst possible game for like the modern social media system, because it's got like narrative and puzzles. You can't like spoil either of those.
Right. Yeah.
So we like engineered the worst possible thing to put on Twitter. But you know, we're definitely gonna get feedback, especially on the puzzle aspect of it, to make sure that we haven't made something impossible for people, but that it's actually fun and, you know, intellectually engaging. But yeah, you can find us on Twitter, Recursive Ruin, Dr. Chad McKinney, Dr. Kurt McKinney. You can find us on Steam. We got a Steam page, so you can find us there. You can definitely wishlist us. We would like that a lot. I hope we get to make
Please
another game, and that would help towards that goal.
Yeah, I mean, to the community aspect, I would say that we do show some like in progress things because if you've seen the trailer, you'll notice there's these crazy fractal visuals. So we'll put stuff out, working on that kind of stuff. But we can't be quite as open as Curtis was saying as some other games because our content is, spoilers are pretty problematic for it. However, we're both very active on Twitter. So if you just are interested in talking to us and hanging out or whatever, Twitter is a really good place to do that. And I'm on there probably too much. So if you just want to talk and hang out, for sure, yeah.
And a question maybe very specific to me, because I suffer from really bad motion sickness. Are you gonna have any just accessibility features, like changing field of vision, like having a reticle on screen, stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we've actually had a couple people that have noted that the game definitely caused some motion sickness for them.
Mhm.
And I have to admit, it's not like an area I'm super knowledgeable
Yeah.
of. So I've done a little bit of research. My plan is to do more,
Mhm.
but we've already put in some initial, measures to try to mitigate it. So we added, you can change, of course, simple things like mouse sensitivity,
Mhm.
because that can help some people. But we also changed it to where you can turn off, there's a depth of field effect. So you can turn off the depth of field. There's motion blur effect. You turn off the motion blur. And we've got an adjustable field of view. So
Yeah, I
these are
mean,
the current
those are
measures.
all the things I look for. So yeah, that's perfect. Cool.
We'll see. Maybe I can do more to help with it, but
Yeah.
the beta testing will help us with that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I remembered the name of the organization, but there's an organization which they were just on one of their guys was just on the Besties podcast last week. Able Game?
Stephen.
Yeah.
Stephen.
What's the name of the org?
I think it is just Able Gamers.
Yeah, I think it's Able Gamers. Yeah, Able Gamers. They have like a slide deck / the way Steve was describing it was what they bring to companies is hey, here are these are these terms and these are these standard, basically out of the box. This is a solution. This is how you solve the problem, rather than being there are disabled people and there's a bunch of disabilities. What do I do? And it seems like an out of the box thing. I will shill for another podcast. Yeah, the latest episode of the Besties, which is available in all the things. They sat the one where they sat with Steve was really informative because I also didn't know anything about it, and I think one of the things Steve was saying was just it's a lot of it is just getting the ideas in front of people, and what that Able Gamers is about is getting the ideas in a digestible format in front of devs, right? Because it's not like people don't want people to play their games. So yeah, I mean, I think that's just worth looking into, and also I think that discussion was really interesting for anyone who wants to know. I think it hit the right points of interesting and not going over too many details, but saying giving a good picture of why one might want to develop or incorporate accessibility options earlier in the development cycle, etc. And it just was an interesting conversation. So as a fan of those, I will recommend that. Right, we're past 2 hours, but I did want to talk about a game that I played this week because I think because all four of us are olds, and we have less time. A pick up and play interesting game is really is a thing that we want to look for, and also it's a friend of mine is on the team. Has joined Bunny Hug a couple of years ago. It's called oh god, now I've got it wrong.
Moonglow Bay.
Thank you, Moonglow Bay. It's a
I started it because
yes.
thought you'd speak about it today, and yeah, I thought the old angle was like this game features you play as an old person, basically, well, quote unquote old person.
I mean,
you
it's
know?
got a a voxely-ish aesthetic, except it's
Mhm.
more of like the blocks are to the point of like several blocks for like a curl of hair, so you get like interesting hairstyles, but still pretty blocky bodies. But because of that, you get like patterns on shirts, but not that like evoke texture, but not really. So it's definitely a really cool aesthetic.
It
But yeah,
looks like the Tourist, if anyone played that. Tourist
yeah.
Hawaii.
Um,
Voxely, detail voxely.
and it is uh, it's a narratively driven fishing RPG set in 1980s Nova Scotia. Well, sorry, Eastern Canada. Uh, where basically the game opens with mild spoilers for the first 10 minutes of the game. It opens with you as already an old and your partner, and what's really cool is you've got like 4 different olds to pick from. And you pick your pronouns, and then you of the remaining 3 you pick your partner, so you can have various couplings, and you pick their pronouns as well. And then basically you've moved to Eastern Canada, to Moonglow Bay, to in your retirement years start a fishing company. Like you're gonna fish and you're gonna make food. That's what you and your partner have decided to do. But Moonglow Bay has a weird supernatural element slash aggressive aquatic life. And then again, spoiler alert here. You wake up like 3 years later, and alone in bed, and you like are crying at a Polaroid of your partner, and you realize that they passed, and then you basically find out that something happened in a boat with your partner, and no one is fishing in this fishing village, and you are trying to drum up business, and your daughter visits, and then the RPG is basically got a nice little loop with investing in the town such that people and tourists will buy your fish-based cuisine. So there's like a fishing and then cooking. Cooking is a series of mini games like tap at the right time to chop things, or chopping, frying, washing. They're all like a small bit of mini games, but it's like pick the
I
recipe.
failed at like 4 of those out of the 6 or something.
You can catch my VOD later this week on YouTube to see what the first hour or so of the game is, but it's just really charming. And one of the things that I really like about it, turns out, never fished in my life. Boy, do I like fishing in games. I think it's to make fishing work, it's got to be meditative and relaxed, because that's what fishing is. That's why people like it. It's why I didn't fish much in Hades, though I did a bit, because it's just like I don't pick up Hades to be in the world and just hang out and like, oh, I've stopped fighting. I can fish because there's water here. Like, it was the one time
fighting out of Tartarus, man. You ain't got time for fishing.
Exactly. It was the one time fishing in the game felt like, well, this is never gonna happen. But like even in like Final Fantasy 14, when I played that earlier this year for a bit, boy did I like spend 2 days just I'm gonna level up my fisher person. I burned my like double XP or whatever on leveling up my fisher person like skill, because you've got stealth. I could just walk around places that like I'm under level 4 and just. And it's a really simple mechanic where you cast. That's like hold it to cast further away. Obviously, the fish are more likely to bite if it's further away. And then if the fish is tugging this way, you pull the pole that way. But you also have what I call reef. Like you tug, and you'll like drag it closer to you. So you have to time it with the right angle, and then you've got it. That's fishing. And then there's different lures and different baits. But you opened up the present your partner gave to you before they passed away, because you had not opened it for years, and it's a fishing journal. And then you find out that like time of day matters, area of the world, like cold water, warm water, etc. There's like I've explored. I found like more Arctic-y frozen water, and I found a little warmer waters, and I've like explored, and there's like more areas to go in my boat because I bought my boat back, and it's just really charming. But at the end of the day,
Yeah.
like it's got a day-night cycle, but and there's like tasks you can do inside if you'd like the RPG element. But really, you could also just like probably not do a lot of the town stuff and just you got the day. I'm just gonna go out and I'm gonna catch some things to make bait out of, make bait, make a couple of fish and chips, put them in the vending machine that's outside of my my house, and then just fish. And what I like, so like when I played it for the stream, it was I was trying to see all the things, and so it was a little more like, oh, now I'll do like I will just follow all the patterns and explore all the things. But I've played it since then, and I've just been like, I'll just fish all day. I've got quests. I don't really care about those quests.
It seems like something that balances the right, you know, has a nice balance between you can get quite into like the RPG mechanics and the you know, I need to fish at 8 p.m. on this day to catch this tusk or this ling or whatever, or I can just chill out and fish. And I think I'll probably like go through this story and just main it and just not be too concerned about filling out my fish journal and stuff like that. And yeah, someone who's eating a lot of fish now, it's like, oh, I know what the thing is. Interested in that. So that's all I want to do. I just want to cook all the fish, really. Even though I think those mini games would get annoying, like
so
for the fifth time or something.
What I like is some of the dishes are really simple. It's like cut, fry, or cut bait, and some of them are really complicated. There's like
Elaborate,
5 steps, and so
that makes things a bit nicer then. Cool.
Yeah, so then you can kind of just choose, like, if you want to min-max the money, because there's also a market, so certain dishes will be, on a day, might be, yield you more cash or less cash. But if you're not actually trying to min-max the game, you can be like, hey, I don't really like cooking. Fish and chips is just cut, fry. Fuck it. Right? Like, you can do that. It's fine. It doesn't even matter what you catch, right? Like, but also, if you're a person who's a completionist, there's like basically an aquarium, and if you give one sample of each thing to the aquarium, it's very Animal Crossing, right? Vibes. That gets more information, but then the marine biologist who runs the aquarium will give you more information about that fish if you give it to them. And so there's like a give and take on that. There's like, I like that it tells you more information. So if you want to fish, you still have an incentive, even if you give 2 shits about the aquarium, to like do that, right? And there's a neat thing that I'm pretty sure I'm correct on this, which is you talk to the random people in town and they're like, oh, have you heard about this fish? And then they say some nonsense, and then you get like in blue text, fish called like the couch potato. And then it adds it to your journal. But then I think when you give it to the marine biologist, sometimes the name switches. So like there was a square fish that was white that I caught in the frozen waters, and I caught Dave.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I caught Dave. Yeah. And then that was really charming until I caught Dave again, and I had 2 Daves. But then I gave one Dave to Marina, because that's what they called the name of the marine biologist, because sometimes humor can be on the nose. And then the next time I caught something that had the same icon as Dave, I assumed it was a Dave, but it was like, it had some other name. So I'm pretty sure what happened was she was like, oh yeah, the townspeople call them Daves, but here's what the real thing is. And so I've updated my journal.
A bluefin tuna, really.
Yeah. So I really like those like light touches that just give it more depth, right? So for example, if you just want to feel more scientific or whatever, you're going to give Marina things like, but I think it's really fun in like a laid back way, and like very pick up put downable. My only regret is that it's not on Switch. I think it like
maybe it's coming to Switch, but I just got it up on xCloud because it's on Game Pass, and I was just like, I was waiting for it to download on my console, and I was like, just want to jump into this for 5 minutes, see what it is. And it's just like, I want to play more of this when I'm in a relaxed state and I can just, as you say, just fish for 5 hours.
Yeah, and like, because you have a boat, and you travel around and like then you get different things. Like I suffer from completionist tendencies. So like, it's a new area. Cool. Well, I've got bait on me, so I'm just gonna put this lure on. No bait. Couple times, then with bait. Couple times. Now I'll switch to this lure with bait, without bait. I have 3 lures. We can do the maths, and it's like, and that's when I realized, I'm playing this wrong because that's my urge, but it's like I don't want to have to be switching things, and I actually don't care if I optimally get all the things available here. And so the next new place I went to, I didn't even check. I was just like, I've caught a cod, neat. Now a pollock, neat. And then I was fine. And I was like, right, this is the type of game that I purposely don't want to engage my min-maxy completionist brain, because
But it always happens. It will inevitably happen.
I except for that, my one brief dalliance with playing the turnip market online, engaging Twitter on Animal Crossing. My Animal Crossing days, after I made a couple million, I just stopped worrying about that. Although also I haven't been back to that game in ages.
You're
I can't.
clean now.
Yeah, but I do think it's one of those things where it's worth like taking a step back and trying not to see the numbers in the game.
But I know myself, and I'll probably want to catch every single fish. I got really hungry playing it as well. That's why I had to put it there, to be fair. Scampi and chips, you know.
Did you have anything? Go on.
So I was just gonna say, I have to admit for myself that tends to be where I go. Either I want a game that has just like piles of numbers everywhere, and I'm gonna like go at it, like Caves of Qud is like that.
Yeah.
I want it to have no numbers at all, and I'm not engaging, with it on that level at all. Something else. So.
Yeah, this one's a bit in the middle, but I think that's why I say I do think because there are numbers, you could fall into the trap. But I think the most enjoyable, at least for me, part of the game was not engaging with the numbers.
Yeah,
I mean, it sounds like with this cooking aspect to it, like that's the kind of thing that I probably would latch on to, at least for a little while. I may not like min-max it and like, optimize and get every single fish and exactly like that. But it would give me kind of a thrust to entertain, leaning into this more meditative aspect of it for some time. That's as opposed to like I played near the original, and that has a fishing aspect into it. I really like the game, but the fishing part sounds very similar. Actually, it has a really similar mechanic with the stick and the fish pulling you and you pulling back, and you fight it and you pull it out, right? And just kind of the raw experience is pretty good, but it doesn't really do anything else beyond that. So other than I think that maybe there's some like side quests that you can complete in particular via fishing, and I think maybe you can make some money off of it or something, but that was never really an issue in the game. And so while it was kind of nice, I did it a few times, I didn't see why I would just go across the world. It felt like that's what the game was like, hey, you can do that, you can go everywhere and fish everywhere. And I was like, but why? But this sounds like, if I'm like, okay, but then I'm doing something with these fish, right? Well, now I see some more reason to be doing it. It's similar to Skyrim, where I wasn't necessarily interested in hunting or anything like that, but when I realized that it was maybe part of the loop for armoring, it's not necessarily that I just wanted to have the best armor, but it was a nice kind of broad experience to go get a rabbit or whatever, and then like skin it, and then make some armor out of it, and then upgrade it, and just this loop, right? So more integrated.
That's how I think I'll play Moonglow Bay, like sort of like Spiritfarer, was it last year, where it's like everything goes back into the ship. So even though I didn't need to 100% Spiritfarer, I did, because everything went back into the ship. And not saving, like, making those little animals pass over. So there you go. Even though I could have just mainlined the story. It's just like, I need all those. I need all that maize. God knows why.
I'll do that with certain things. So for example, Horizon Zero Dawn was a game that I nearly 100% did, and I almost never do that with games. And the reason why is because I found one of the slight spoiler alerts, but there's these recordings that you can find from just before the end of the world, And I don't know, it was just super compelling to me just from a story aspect.
Yeah.
And I just really wanted to explore that world more. To me, that was probably the most compelling part of the whole game, was just that series of like little expositional kind of dialogues that you find of this person that just is kind of documenting right after the fall. And that was kind of the thread that pushed me to be like, okay, well, if I'm in the middle of this random place, why not get this like lotus thing or whatever the flowers were, and then get a few more of the things. And I usually leave those kind of collectibles and stuff like that alone, but the gameplay was so good and the story was so good, and they had enough like lore and stuff in those elements that it made it feel really worthwhile. And I just kind of want to live in that world more. So.
Me too. Robot dinosaurs. There's nothing better.
I mean, agreed. Although also haven't finished that game.
Yeah.
Oh, getting the shake ahead. Ooh. Yeah, I every week I out myself as a bad non-gamer because it's like, I never really played that or didn't finish that, or have a Steam collection in over 1,200 but I've finished 7.
And Caves of Qud is on
Qud.
your wish list as well.
Is it?
Yeah, it said one person wants this game.
Oh yeah, it is on my wish list.
And it was you.
Yeah, it's always me. I've gotten better at not acquiring games if I don't have time. And one of the weird thing is as a video game streamer person / podcaster, now it's like, well, like I stream every Tuesday at noon BST. That's when I played like Moonglow Bay, and it's like, that means I play a game a week most weeks. But also, it's 2 to 3 hours of gaming. When do I have the time for the other things? Which is again why like having the Switch and you make like playing games on a journey sounds great. Because then it's not a trade-off of doing work because I can't really read that much on a train, yada yada. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I have a question for you two now, which is, have we compelled you to look into Moonglow Bay / do you have Games Pass? Because then it's free.
I mean, I'd already been aware of the game, and I was excited about it before you had mentioned it. So I saw it on Twitter. Like I see a lot of indie games on there, and it just the aesthetic alone made me want to play it. It just seems incredibly endearing. So
I think that's a really good word for it.
Yeah, same. For sure.
Excellent. Do you guys do the Game Pass thing as PC gamers?
No,
should I?
I think so. We're very big fans of Game Pass because it's like like £9 a month, something like that.
Well, Microsoft Rewards, you can get it for £0.
Yeah, so Lucy does the whole get all the reward points, and you have like 3 months of plus of backlog of points with Ultimate.
Yeah, I used to have years worth. Now it's down to like 2 months, but it's like I can top that up at any time for free. So thanks Microsoft for being a big corporation and not missing my money.
Yeah. Which is like doing a couple Bing searches a day, basically. But I am not doing that, which I should, because I don't have an income.
You're giving physical money to the devs, so nothing wrong with that either.
But I mean, honestly, the library is really good, and like things like Moonglow, like we're at a point where there's enough saturation that like the devs of Moonglow Bay put it on Game Pass. So I was like, maybe I'll like hit them up for a review code, and then they didn't respond. It's like, I'll play it on Game Pass, whatever. It seems like a cool game. I'll give them the free press, right? But like a bunch of games I was looking for, like Monster Train, card-based battler, I was also super interested in. It came out on Games Pass. Like, there's just basically take a look at the library, and then similar, especially mindy games, are really, if anything, if you like, a similar game is probably coming to Game Pass. That seems to be the trend. And then of course first party titles, and so like all the Yakuza games came on the other month, and it's like, that's represents more than a year's worth of gaming for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's something where it's like, not the jury's out on whether this is a good thing or a bad thing overall for developers, but it seems like it's been a good thing so far for the majority. So, you know, I'll leave the number crunching to the people who know, and I just hope, especially the smaller devs. You see how many, like people cutting deals with Epic and stuff like that. How much the bigger devs are getting. I just hope it's a good deal for the smaller devs, and those games are reaching more. Which, like Oxenfree, we were talking about that earlier. Like, apparently their game sold even more after they put it on, Game Pass, and like they see they see the value in it. So yeah, before hawking Game Pass, it seems like it's
Yeah.
good for
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah, as a consumer, I can definitely recommend it, especially if you are interested in, like I said, the like Mindy games.
Sure, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I will definitely check it out.
When you have time, after you maybe after you finish your game.
I mean, that's part of the issue. So like,
Yeah.
the issue is just simply that I don't get as much time to hardcore play it. But you know what? The beta milestone is coming up, so hopefully after that I'll get to play a little bit more in kind of hardcore crunch mode.
I think we both tend to play games it's a bit of feast or famine, because I have this very addictive personality. Whenever I start playing a game, I just have to invest an obscene amount of hours in it until like my brain just doesn't switch off, right?
Right.
I got into that world, I got into the characters, like I want to I want to live in that, and then okay, I can step away and like give myself some space. But
I'm the same way, which is why I was so paranoid about starting like deep games in my PhD, because it was like, nope, this is gonna F everything up. Why am I saying F? I've been swearing like a sailor the whole day. Anyway, but I mean, so this is why I think like I have gravitated to shorter games, such that even if they like overtake me, then
10 hours max or something.
Yeah, 10. What are you, Methuselah?
I mean, I prefer 2. So.
That seems like a good place to call it, seeing as we have gone for 2.5 hours. So first off, thanks again, you guys, for joining us. This was a real pleasure. I know
a lot of fun. Yeah, absolutely.
We'd be happy to have you back.
It was a lot of fun.
I know
I learned a lot about music.
I mean, to be honest, I like Lucy said earlier, I would gladly chat more music stuff and learn a little more for conversation at any time in the future. But you did plug some of your socials because I asked for them earlier. But why don't we just get some plugs in? The name of the game is Recursive Ruin, but also
so name of the game Recursive Ruin. You can find it on Steam. Definitely please follow and wish list, because hopefully we'll get to make another game. You know, that's the goal here. You can also follow us on Twitter. So Dr. Chad McKinney, Dr. Curtis McKinney, or Dr. Kurt McKinney. They didn't let me fit my whole name on there, people. Twitter, fix that. We have the technology now. But you can also follow Recursive Ruin on Twitter. Those are the main places I think to find us, and we'll definitely, you can talk to us, and we put up things all the time. We talk to people, so and check out the trailer, because the trailer is cool.
Yes, very best of luck for the launch and the build up to that. Like, I hope we can get you on after the game launches, maybe.
Yeah,
just do a complete post-mortem with us. Just lay it all out.
Oh, you know what I did forget? Well, I went straight to plugs. It's because you both had one beer, so obviously that's your beer of choice. I had 2 though, and I forgot that. But actually, do you have any last comments on your beers? If not, that's fine. But like,
I'll quickly go first. Like, it wasn't one of those where it's like, oh, I was enjoying the conversation, but it wasn't like, oh, I need to I don't feel like drinking it all the time. It's one that lasted like most of that 2.5 hour conversation, because it was just so. It wasn't heavy or overbearing in any way, but it was just the flavor and the taste. It just lasted enough, and it was just it's a good beer. It's maybe a bit oilier and a bit sweeter than I may usually enjoy. And towards the end, it was like, okay, it was like felt like a bit of a marathon, but otherwise, it's a really good beer. Pomona and I make fantastic beers. So yeah, my closing thoughts.
For me, as far as Damnation, which, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, I was actually drinking it in a Russian River goblet here.
Class. Yeah.
But yes, it was like I said, better than I had remembered, and it finished still very strong. I'm not sure it's better than Duval, but it is, I think, a very good Belgian style ale. Yeah, quite enjoyed it. Recommend it if anybody happens to see it.
Yeah, I'll see that one out.
Yeah, I was gonna say my sister's my sister and brother-in-law, and my niece, who's almost 2 now, live in Berkeley. So I'm always trying to hit them up with I got some congratulatory beers left at my parents' place for finishing my PhD.
Nice.
And so it's like, oh, you realize you've opened up a can of worms, because now you've exposed yourself as a potential funnel to get me tasty Bay Area beers. So yeah, I'm gonna have to add some stuff to the wish list, so to speak. I had the Hiver Blonde beer, which was called the Hiver Blonde beer, and then the Padstow Brewing Mayday Citra Pale Ale. They both were very interesting and similar. Mostly similar, I say, because they're like standard beers with a twist, and oddly, it was a bit floral on both ends. I really enjoyed the Padstow Brewing Citra Pale Ale. As a, hey, if I'm in a pub in Cornwall, I know I will enjoy this beer even if it's in cask, despite the fact that I like keg beer because of my
you're in
upbringing.
Cornwall, you'll be happy regardless.
Yeah,
so,
that's true.
yeah.
But I think I preferred the Hiver Blonde beer. I thought that the honey was, they just have the right balance of honey. It was a good blonde that just got like accentuated, and like that I described that umbrella of honey. Like it just helped bring some flavors together. It added a sweetness, but again, it was very light. I was expecting like a sugar bomb, and it wasn't that, and it was just really satisfying while still being a blonde, and it finished like a beer. And I felt like the Citra Pale Ale from Padstow was a British Pale Ale that like did some really interesting things with the hop, but ultimately they didn't feel like they were melded as well. It finished kind of a little too light and a little not beery enough for me. And so I mean, again, I really recommend it. It wasn't quite as good of a cohesive a package. And mostly it's like, despite the fact that normally I would always aim for a second pale ale over a second blonde just because of my tastes, I would rather, like, I would easily have a second one of these. And so that's usually my barometer of, oh, will I have a second? Would I want this again right now? That means it's probably my beer of the week. So that's the one I've got. Cool. We've been Tanked Up. You can reach us at Tanked Up Cast on Twitter. Lucy at JuicyLuce9, myself at the Omniarch. We're also on Instagram, though very infrequently. You can find all our podcast VODs of Let's Plays, whatnot, and articles at outoflives.net, or our YouTube channel, Out of Lives Network, or here on Twitch, Out of Lives Network. But yeah, that's basically all the things. Drop us a line. Oh, you can also email us here at tankedupcast@gmail.com. Those are the things. Talk to us, comment, like, subscribe, all those things. And if you enjoy this app, please let us know, because we'd I mean, it'd be nice to know that you enjoyed this as much as we did, but we're probably going to have these guys on again. But just let's pretend that we need you to tell us that, just for the interaction. This has been a really, really fun and informative episode. I enjoyed meeting you guys. Thanks again. This has been a blast.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun.
And I really look forward to more Recursive Rain.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And then the sequel, Recursive Pour. Because when it rains, it pours.
Well, Recursive Ruin.
Oh, wait. Right, yeah, sorry. Recursive Rain's a different game, isn't it? There's actually a game called Recursive Rain. I'm pretty sure.
Risk of Rain.
Maybe. Anyway, yeah, Recursive Ruin. That makes more sense. But I am going to have to name the episode Recursive Pour now, just because of the mistake I've made. Anyway.
It makes sense with the beers. With the
yeah. It's like my brain misfired into a misfire that was still a misfire.
Fractals.
Anyway, yeah, that's been us. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
www.outoflives.net